3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the SMITE Pro League seeding tournament here for Masters, powered by our good friends over at Prime Gaming. If you have a Prime Gaming subscription, well, there's a lot of stuff that you can get. You click on the little crown up in the top right of your screen, and you can pull up the drop down, see all the cool games and all the cool skins for other things inside of games that you can grab out to there. If you aren't already a Prime member, make sure to get a Prime membership, because on top of all the cool things I just talked about there, you also get free delivery whenever you buy things through Amazon. You get music, movies, all kinds more that come with your Prime membership, as well as tons of exclusive content, free games, free monthly Twitch subscriptions to your favorite channels. So if you ever had a here, make sure to use it here if you haven't already done so. And then you also get all kinds of discounts and other cool things. So make sure that you make the most out of that Prime Gaming subscription that you have. Like I said, tons of cool games. And I got to throw a little apology. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't get a chance to play Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, but we got a couple of weeks of downtime after this, so maybe I can get out there, and that way I can give a nice, honest review on that one. It's J-Mac. I got Mifflin joining me here, though, on the desk. We got the Olympus Bolts up against the Oni Warriors for our second and final set of the day here in this seeding tournament, and this should be a good one, especially with the rise that the Oni Warriors have had. Sure, they lost to the Bolts early on to the season, but that was a long time ago, Mifflin.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. I spoke to the Jade Dragons. I tried to talk to the Taurus Titans, but those guys clear out the studio very quickly. The Jade Dragons hanging around. They said a couple of them, and no matter what, the only thing the through line was, they all think it's going to go 5. Some think to the Bolts, some think over to the Warriors. But either way, I'm pretty excited.
We'll have to see. And like you said, best of 5 set for our first one. That went to the Jade Dragons 3-1 over the Titans. And now another best of 5 for you guys between the Bolts and the Warriors. Winner of this plays against the Jade Dragons. The loser has to play against the Tartarus Titans. Those will both be tomorrow, and also both best of 5. So there's going to be plenty of SMITE action between these 2 days. Remember, this is seeding up towards the Masters LAN for these top 4 teams to figure out where they're going to be sitting and how long they get to wait before they play up against their opposition. But it also seeds these guys for Phase 2 of the SPL, give themselves a better standing as they get to start out the second half of the season.
Yeah, very excited for this one. A lot on the line here, and as we start to move into Phase 2, all of a sudden there's going to be some world implication as well. So this is a very important tournament, not only for the Phase, though, but also during Masters LAN. Being able to hold your cards close to your chest, so important. You know, you want to show your heat when the games get hot. You don't want to show them early, not against these SEC teams that are able to compete in, not against any of the lower-seeded squads. So the higher you perform here, well, the higher you're probably going to perform overall.
And then the more you also get to look at down the road as well. You get to watch all those other sets happen, so you kind of get to see how the meta is developing out here. Talking about the Olympus Bolts here, it's a team that we've had a lot of topics and a lot of conversations about as this season has gone through. I mean, this is now the 3rd year that this squad is together. They've been able to hold themselves up pretty nicely here in Phase number 1. And talking into this dual lane matchup here, you know, between Awesome Jake and then Neil Mod be over on the other side there for the Oni Warriors. Jake has really been able to step it up, but more than anything, Jake has kind of broadened his god pool. I say that we immediately go to a Ymir highlight, but Jake has really been able to broaden up that god pool, and it's really brought an immense boost for his team here.
Yeah, when you say he broadened his god pool, you meant he locked in Nox. Jake has decided to take the moniker of villain of the SPL, not only ruining the SPL meta, but also ruining my casual games, because God bless, I can't lock in a game without lining up against or with a Nox player. That said, the Olympus Bolts have certainly been on a resurgence. These guys have been dominant. And I think maybe the greatest strength of Jake and the greatest strides he's made, as we get to look at a little bit of his villain arc now, is his ability to be able to get off the gas. Throughout the entirety of last year, you talked to Jake, he said, I'm hitting the jets. I'm going in. I'm getting involved. I'm making things happen. He's still capable of doing that, but he's also alleviated some of those growing pains. He isn't just walking in and dying like he used to anymore. It's more so a calculated level of aggression, and the Olympus Bolts now holistically benefiting from that, not only diversifying their god pools, but diversifying their win conditions.
And everybody's really been able to kind of rally around Jake here on the side of the Bolts. Lazaro's been able to get back towards his peak performance on the team. Haddix has really stepped up to be one of the top contenders in the SPL, especially in his respective role over in that solo lane. But we do have Jake standing by for our post-game interview to talk to him a little bit here. First off, Jake, thanks for coming by for the pregame interview here. Talking to you a little bit about this one. You're going up against the Warriors. You guys got to win on them earlier on into the season. Is there any kind of pressure going up into this set against them to try and get another win, really showing that you guys are still the best?
You know, my team's been dubbing out. We're all pretty confident. You know, if we just do what we do, I think it'll you know, be a pretty good set from us.
He wanted to say easy.
You wanted to get that easy one in there. As Mifflin kind of brought up, how's it feel kind of being the quote-unquote villain of the SPL with this Nox pick out here? I mean, you've really seemed to really hit the ground running with this pick out here.
You know, I just have a lot of fun playing Nox, like not allowing people to play the game. You know, I have a lot of fun when I'm taking away the fun from other people to, you know, play the game. And I'm just a big Nox fan.
Give you one little bit of a pedestal here. You got one thing you can say to your opponent, Neil, on the other side. What do you want to say to him?
You know, Neil, we have the power of friendship on our team here. So, you know, we win, yeah. Power of friendship.
Power of friendship coming from the villain of the SPL, Jake. Thanks for coming by for the pregame interview. I'll let you get back with the team. Can the villains use the power of friendship? I don't think that's how that works in the
Bad
animes.
guys got friends, man.
You know what? They do. They also got a lot of minions to their side here. Sometimes more minions.
Same amount of minions. You load in.
Well, I guess in this exact example, yes, they have the exact same amount of minions for each on each side for these supports here. But now, let's talk about a little bit about Neilma here for the side of the Oni Warriors. And this Oni Warriors team as a whole is one that came into this phase, and we all had big question marks. Are the Oni Warriors going to step up to be the team that we expected in Season 8? I think they have done that and more so far here, Mifflin, more than anything else. These guys coming into this one are still probably considered a dark horse, but I think even after this weekend and going into Masters, it probably won't be so much the case.
Oni Warriors might just be my favorite for this tournament, man. These guys have hit their stride, so to speak. They have certainly leveled up their gameplay, and it's something they have been talking about for years now. Hey, when we're all on LAN together, when we're all able to just look to our left and see each other, look to our right, have my teammate right there, that's when this team is going to start performing at the level that the fans and the casters had expected of them. And they have done so far. I mean, these guys have really solidified their style of play. They've really solidified what their kinds of drafts are going to be, and they are looking mighty powerful for it. Not only have they become better as a team, though, but individual performances have been going through the roof. Neilma himself has been having a very good year so far. Cuvo Fred has really picked up his gameplay as well. And when everybody's performing, the Oni Warriors look incredibly good. No longer the homies, now the Warriors again.
Yeah, Neilma specifically has really stepped up his aggression over in this duo lane. He used to be somewhat of a passive lane over there with him and Vote. They would just try and do their best to sometimes survive, but now Neil is going with these much more aggressive picks. This Ymir, namely, is one that he's really liked to go back over towards for a couple of times, and it's been paying off for his team. This level of aggression really across the board. It's no longer just Nika being up there into the front line. It's no longer, you know, just one player on this team stepping up here. Everybody has, and I think Neil has been a good rally point for this team.
He has been, and if you want to harken back to previous seasons, when the Oni Warriors were winning, it was when they could drag the game out to a 40-minute mark. When Neilma was performing on PK, it was always a war of attrition. Nowadays, these guys can perform in the early. They are capable of adapting to these late-game team fights. They have really become a much more hard team, much more difficult team to lock down, which portion of the game that they're aiming for. And in doing so, it becomes harder to draft against this squad. It becomes harder to strategize. The Oni Warriors, definitely a threat in the league.
All I'm going to say is, looking back at that highlight, I forgot how nasty that wall was by Neil during the midst of that team fight. Talking about Neil Mal, we've got him now standing by for our pregame interview to represent the Oni Warriors. Thanks for coming out for the pregame interview, Neil. Coming to this set, you know, I talked with Jake a little bit before. You know, they came in, they had a win over you guys earlier on to the season. Is there any kind of added pressure up into this matchup to try and get a dub over these guys?
I wouldn't say there's added pressure. No more than we'd put on ourselves for every set. I mean, when we come out to play, we expect to beat every team. And they did beat us earlier in the season, but I think that we had a very slow start. We went 1-2. So I think we're a very different team now than we were at the beginning of the season. I'm excited to play them again.
Yeah, I mean, your guys' evolution and growth just in this first phase alone from the SPL qualifiers up until now. I mean, you guys look like a totally different team out here. Is there anyone particular on the team that can maybe kind of credit some of that towards, you know, obviously all of you guys are stepping up, but is there kind of that one, you know, beacon that's really helped you guys out?
I think everyone's done an amazing job on the team, just making sure that we're improving. I think Fred has really stepped up this year since I've teamed with him for a few years in terms of leadership. I think that's been very big for our team, but everyone on this team has their own role to play, and without everyone on this team putting in the work, we wouldn't be where we are.
Yeah. All right, well, I gave Jake the floor here. I'm going to give it to you. You got one thing you can say over to Jake on the opposite side of the booth. What are you saying to him?
He's so handsome.
Oh, there we go.
And so strong.
He like looked at me when he said it.
Getting the compliments out there. Well, Neil, thank you for coming by for the pregame interview. I'll let you get back with the team to get set up.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Oh my God.
With the nice round. Nice little compliment. And that's always the thing with Neil. Is I don't think I've ever heard Neil say a mean thing towards anybody else.
Yo, I got butterflies in my stomach right there. Neil's got me feeling some kind of way.
He
Oh
did
my
peek
goodness.
over at you whenever he said that. Maybe it was not just towards Jake, but over to you too, Mifflin.
I hope so, because I'm going to take it. I need that today.
You know what? Believe that it was you, Mifflin. Believe that was you, that one was towards here. But the Olympus Bolts and the Oni Warriors, a best-of-5 matchup. And I'm going to be honest, I can't remember the last time we've seen these two teams face off in a best-of-5 up against each other. I mean, sure, we've had plenty of best-of-3s throughout the season here. But once we start getting into these endurance matches here, the Warriors were able to kind of go toe-to-toe with the Scarabs, who are a team that are known to run into these long sets as well. So the Oni Warriors do at least have a little bit of advantage in that sense.
Yeah, no stranger to late games, no stranger to long sets of the Oni Warriors. Just individually as players, every one of these guys have got an impressive pedigree behind them, a lot of tenure within the league. So if it does become an endurance match, I might even favor the Warriors in that regard because they do have the experience. Dedicated shot caller Neil Ma back from the PK days. I don't know if you guys remember that set at Worlds, but it went all 5 games and went about 7 hours. Yeah, I think Neil's going to be just fine here today.
Yeah, and up against the Olympus Bolts here, man. We talked about the dual lane matchup a lot. Talk about this solo lane matchup between these guys. We get jump into the picks and bans for game number 1. I mean, Haddix and Nika, have really been some of the top scorers in the fantasy, but also have been 2 of the most consistent players across the board, not just for their teams, but in the SPL in general. So that matchup, I think, is one that I would also like to dial in here for the picks and bans, Mifflin. I mean, we've been seeing a lot of focus still on the Artio. Cthulhu still seen maybe not as much, at least today, as concerned. But, I mean, that matchup in the solo lane has been so back and forth between those two.
Yeah, I am curious as to what that matchup is going to be. Haddix and Nika both dominating the power rankings in the fantasy league. So I think maybe some sparks could fly over in the short lane. That said, generally, those two get their points on rotation out of lane rather than inside of it, which is just the nature of solo. Speaking of, maybe a couple solo bans already. Kleena removed from the table, some of that flex potential, and the villainous nature of the Olympus Bolts addressed early by a Nox ban.
Yeah, that one taken away, as well as Eset, Daji, and now Artio. So the Bear will not make her way into the solo lane for these two teams out here. One more ban still for the Oni Warriors, and a lot on the table to still take away. It seems that more of our bans as of recent, Mifflin, have been more so kind of targeted bans, less general ones. Artio definitely still a more general ban, but things like Nox and Eset, these are definitely much more targeted.
Yeah, and as the phase develops and as the years goes on, I think we're going to start to see more and more targeted bans as these teams figure out what it is exactly that each squad is looking to do, what it is that they use as the keystones of their compositions, and I think the Oni Warriors very adeptly, it's not as if the Bolts were hiding it, but do identify that Nox has been the crux of the majority of these Bolts drafts, so they removed that one themselves. Maybe the Bolts, realizing that there is likely a Nox ban coming their way, decided to get a preemptive Eset ban out, immediately just realizing that is one of the best counter matchups available. But in having so many target bans across the board, you do leave a lot of meta selections out there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Yemoja lock-in the last set that got very highly prioritized. But there are a couple of Guardians that I think deserve that level of priority. Yemoja up there, Khepri as well, one that has been very well suited for both of these teams.
I mean, very well suited in the SPL in general, sitting at like 70+% win rate on that kind of a god. But it will be Yemoja, who hasn't had so much success, at least in the tournament so far, only a 25% win rate for her, but still a powerful and a potent god nonetheless in towards that duo lane. Even this far in, I mean, we've gone through all of Season 8, now jumping into Season 9. And this god, no matter how many times she's been hit, has still shown to be one of the top levels out there. And it's really just comes down to the nature of the skill of this guy. I mean, Riptides have got to be clutch if you want to be able to separate yourself from the rest of the pack. Usage of the River's Rebuke as well. And that now leaves a couple of picks over towards the Oni Warriors. That Khepri still up that you were talking about.
Yeah, so the Oni Warriors, pick of the field here, not much limiting them outside of the bans. Could look towards the Khepri, but I think you could even hold off on your Guardian selection, even if you want it in your top 3. Pretty unlikely that the Bolts take another one for themselves or another facilitator support style, as if another Guardian is locked in, it will likely be headed for the soul lane or even potentially the jungle. So I think the Warriors are in a position now where they can potentially look towards ADCs. Jingwei has been very popular recently. ADC is locked in, but it's Chernobog instead. That is a god that has a slight resurgence recently, has been having a good deal of success for the Tartarus Titans. Cyclone Spin 1 that I think popularized it yet again. That global presence incredibly strong. You've got great 2v2 potential. I'm not sure that I think Chernobog is exactly adept in the 1v1, doesn't really have the best potential there, but split pushing, things along those lines, global presence, that's what Chernobog brings you.
And then a Shiva to go right alongside that Chernobog. Good jungle matchup. We've seen what both Layers and Cuvo Fred have been able to do with this pick here. So we'll see if the Oni Warriors do elect to keep that god over into the jungle. We have seen, I believe we've also seen Nika pilot that god at least one time here for the Oni Warriors throughout the start of Phase 1. But now we go over to the Bolts. They've got the Umoja locked in. Now Chernobog, that does leave the Jingwei up that you were talking about just a moment ago, who has seemed to have been one of the more promising pickups there. But we've also been seeing a rise of some of the other hunters, specifically Hachiman has really kind of risen up into prominence for a few hunter players.
Yeah, seems to be safety is the name of the game yet again in the hunter role. We saw that meta develop towards the tail end of Season 7, carried through Season 8 for a little while, and now coming back yet again in Season 9. I think Hachiman, so essentially just plug and play, doesn't really dictate too much of your draft. You wouldn't show your hand very heavily if the Bolts take it for themselves, but instead, a comfort selection in Nemesis. That is probably headed for last in the jungle. Zeus as well. This is a very strong team fight composition.
I completely forgot about Zeus for a moment. We were so indulged in all the other bans earlier on between the Nox and the Iset that somehow Zeus has managed to slip his way here for Venenu on the side of the Bolts here. But now if you're the Oni Warriors, you're looking at this Zeus. A couple of answers we've seen in the past to Zeus have been specifically Thoth as kind of that counter matchup. You want to be able to outrange the Zeus here. So if you are the Warriors, do you try and grab that mid lane mage to kind of counteract that now, or do you risk it and go for something else here, Mifflin?
Well, I think if the Warriors don't take their mid selection now, they will likely have to contend with a couple of bans rolling their way. So they do so. The Morgan locked in. Not that standard answer to the Zeus that you bring up, which is just outranging it and not getting into that close proximity where Chain Lightning just one-shots you, where Detonate becomes that massive teamfight tool. Instead, now the Morgan in the late game will have potential to isolate the Zeus and maybe even find some of these 1v1s, one of the how did Twig word it? One of the corniest combos in Smite where you just die before you're allowed to react. The Morgan is afforded that opportunity, but as of now, not exactly the greatest transformation targets. Maybe you're turning into Shiva in some of these late game fights just so you can have that added layer of safety. Again, one of the slipperiest warriors in Smite, but it's not that Cthulhu transformation that we're used to seeing, or things like the Gilgamesh or even the Camazot. So as of now, maybe the Bolts can decide, all right, well, let's start to limit some of those transformations. Let's try and stop the Oni Warriors before they can adapt their draft around the Morgan.
That's a nice little shout, the fact that we saw Gilgamesh so heavily banned in set number 1, but now we're not seeing him at all here in set number 2, at least not yet. First bans out will be the Izanami Bologna on the side of the Oni Warriors. So taking a split shot there, one at Nika, and then one over there to Barracuda as well. And then the Bolts will take Bacchus off to be their first ban. Still one more to their name. And there's a lot up to be taken out. And recognizing that they don't really have great options to get out of a cage, they will ban away the Odin. Smart ban here by the Bolts.
Yeah, double Odin cage, pretty hard to deal with. Phantom Shell only works just the once, so if the Morgan transforms, would be able to initiate the fight or reinitiate it for the Oni Warriors. And as you said, Nemesis, Zeus, and Umoja are all going to struggle up against the Ring of Spears, and the Olympus Bolts not willing to put themselves in that uncomfortable position. I am surprised to see the Izanami ban from the Oni Warriors. I mean, it's a meme, but Barracuda has played like 102 games of Jingwei. Wouldn't be surprised if he decides to take that one for themselves. But on the other hand, the Oni Warriors, we had brought up the Khepri earlier, seems they equally value it. And it is actually a pretty nasty combo having the Morgan with Khepri. The Morgan generally will put herself pretty far out of position if she acts as a solo agent in these late game team fights, looking for those executes onto things like the Zeus or even the Nemesis, catch them slipping in the jungle. Then you have to contend with the immediate turnaround.
Whoa.
Well, Khepri removes that with that added layer of safety. A pick I wasn't expecting to see this year even. Artemis locked in. That's a late game hyper carry through and through, but it is susceptible to a lot of the lockdown and a lot of the dive of the Oni Warriors. That is a very immobile ADC.
And not just the Artemis, the Horus coupled along with it, but we did see Haddix take this god over into the solo lane previously. I think that was their set up against the Valkyries, and it did pretty well. He was able to find some pretty massive ultimates in the midst of those team fights there, but I think you're right to highlight the Artemis. And we don't see this god very much. He came up a little bit during Season 8 when the crit meta was really strong at that time, when Hunters didn't really care what they were doing because it was just fight as soon as you can. But on to the other side here, talk about this Cucullin, because this is a god that we also do not see very much. It was really for a while, only Yarkor kind of playing this god.
Yeah, when Warrior's Axe got nerfed, Kakullen got a major hit to his power rankings, but still is capable of disrupting the backline team fight, has an okay matchup up against Nemesis in the 1v1, that ultimate able to disrupt the shield very easily, closes gap onto Zeus very, very well. I think that's probably the main reason we're seeing Kakullen locked in. He can survive some of those dive situations. The main issue with Zeus is, hey, we need someone to get back there and deal with this guy, but he's also just dealing a whole lot of damage no matter who you are. Kakullen, with the HP shield of the Rage Transformation, with all the CC built into his kit, should be able to make some waves in the backline and allow and create the space for their Oni Warriors to utilize their backliners, to allow this Chernobog to start channeling some of these auto attacks, to allow the Morgan to get involved. Kakullen, I think, a versatile tool, but maybe slightly weak in his ability to finish off some of these kills, which is why the front line consists of Shiva as well. Between the two of them, they should be able to put the threat onto Zeus.
I mean, as we start pushing towards these later game team fights, because if any indication of how game one went of our previous set, we started tipping near 40 minutes, and most of these games have been averaging around that 30-minute mark here. Where do the Oni Warriors kind of find their way back in? I mean, you got to be able to get to Zeus. You got to be able to get to Artemis to try and stop down these carries. Do the Warriors have the tools to do so?
I think that the Oni Warriors have got themselves a very strong early game power spike. Anytime a Shiva is in your draft, you really want to start making waves at levels 1, at level 2, one of the strongest level 2 gods in the game. We saw it from the Tartarus Titans. Every single time Layers was playing Shiva, he was getting into the back camps at the 2-minute mark. He was rotating over towards the duo lane very early on, and I want to see that same level of play from the Oni Warriors. Outside of that, if the Oni Warriors can't establish some sort of lead in the early game, the Olympus Bolt's composition, top to bottom, is just incredibly strong in a late-game team fight. Hard-pressed to find an ADC that scales as hard as Artemis, and a mage that scales as hard as Zeus.
Well, we'll have to see which team comes out on top here, game number 1. The Olympus Bolts and the Oni Warriors. We'll throw it over to Dulcin and Gore for game 1.
A date with the Jade Dragons on the other end of this best-of-5 between the Olympus Bolts and the Oni Warriors, as two teams, Gore, I think, with very similar resurgences early on here in Season 9, face off against one another. And I think the similarity lies in the jungle. Lazra and Cubo Fred and their ability to get active early has made both of these teams look so much better here as of late. That's where my eyes go early in this
And I think it was last week you were talking about it a little bit, looking like back on the last 6 games, like KDAs for them.
Yeah.
You will see for the wins for these teams, Lazra and Cubo typically have really good KDAs, and for the losses for these teams, they'll be middling, right? Maybe not the worst, maybe not the best. They'll just exist, and so I think that is something that both of these junglers have provided. Cubo, you talk about Season 8, and just go to last year wasn't necessarily enticing. You go to Season 7 as well, wasn't that great, and maybe as enticing. And of course, Season 7 was wild just because of how different regular season was to Worlds. Worlds Cubo was nuts. Regular season Cubo, maybe not so much.
Neoma, what are you doing this far up? Has to use the sprint to get out. Barracuda wants to find another auto attack or two, but Vote will be in range to body block those off. That is also a thing, Gore, I think the Oni Warriors have been able to avoid, which, while they are playing good Smite now, Vote and Neoma, also Jake now the support under a little bit of pressure. Vote and Neoma in Season 8, every once in a while, would fall a bit behind, to put it kindly, over in the duo lane. I think that's a part of the game the Oni Warriors have stabilized. The duo lane stabilization. Even if we're not winning, we're not feeding, we're not falling behind, and the Oni Warriors have looked better for it.
They have gotten a lot cleaner, and I think it just goes for every single role. I think they've gotten a lot cleaner. Some of that has to do with who's playing over here now versus who is playing a lot cleaner. They're just not even in the game.
Yeah, right.
At least in terms of stabilizing themselves and keeping things balanced. But I also think that they've gotten, I think, a lot more synergy. Just between Neil and Vote, they were still playing together in the same space last year. It's just now we get to see what this team can do at its maximum potential, I think, with all of that experience behind them. I think the desk had mentioned a little bit earlier, but Neil, probably one of the best guys to have on your team when you're going into a best-of-5, especially if it becomes a long run. Hey, what are we doing in Game 5 3+ hours from now?
Right.
Versus right now, who's going to be able to get the big pop-off moment in Game 1?
Lasbra. All right, never mind.
That's exactly the kind of moment where it's you gotta wait, you gotta hope he's going for something. He's showing face, though.
I'm thinking he was. Right, because that's something, if we want to talk about the Bolts for a minute. What perfect tone control on my part, Lasbra. Nope, immediately turns around and walks away. That is something, though, jokes aside, that Lasbra has started to do more often, and we were talking about it with Cubo Fred. I think you can apply a lot of the same conversations to Lasbra. Because over the course of Season 8, the Bolts were also a difficult team to lock down, a team who were on the longest winning streak. I don't know if they ever crossed SPL history or not. I forget what the asterisks were on that. They beat a lot of teams in a row is the point. The longest win streak of the year for sure. And then also fell out of Worlds, maybe at a point where this team wouldn't be happy. I think Lasbra turning up his game and his ability early on in Season 9 to, you know, even if we're avoiding those only level 2 ganks and we're finding more level 3, 4, 5, 6 onward ganks, that's an area Lasbra has really improved to make the Bolts look better.
It's an entire conversation, I think, for both of these teams of ceilings and floors, right? Not like HGTV, like literally just like where
love that channel.
Their maximum performance is. Both of them, absolute potential to be world champions and just knock anybody out of the park.
Lasbra!
Both of them, a lot of potential to just completely fall apart, right? And last year, that's what we came to expect. I think so far this year, the floors, the bottom end of each of these teams has moved up.
Agreed.
And so it's less of a gap. You're getting less variability week to week. And so you can expect a little more security, a little more consistency from each of them. And that's been like the big buzzword around them was, oh, cool, that was great. Can you do it again?
Numa avoids running into the Riptide, as Awesome Jake would have sent him backwards. What a crazy year. Now, this gets a bit off topic for the specific set, but the fact that the Leviathans and the Kings, the other 2 teams in our top 6, are not playing this weekend because they're outside of the top 4, that's just so impressive to me. And when we sat down with the Kings, they were talking about how it just felt like one singular weekend threw them off. The difference between the top seed and seed 6 is like an individual game win. I think Season 9 has just been the gift that keeps on giving. And now we get a great, I mean, even though this is technically a seeding LAN, in a way I almost look at this as like a mini Phase 1 playoffs because you get the top 4 teams and technically you'll have a team who wins the tournament.
Yeah, you could tell me that this was going to be the top 4 teams at Masters, and I'd still believe you, right?
Yeah.
Like I think that, like you said, and I believe we got an interview not just with the Kings, but a lot of them recently where it was just like, you know what? We lose one game where we won, or we lose, or win one game where we lose, and the entire top 4 shifts. Like the entire dynamic of who's at the top and who's at the bottom ends up flipping. I think the Warriors got some really, really important wins, you know, over the Kings of the Leviathans, which is massive. Like seeing the world champion, the reigning team, go down as fast as they did, I think is kind of an impressive turnaround, but not in the way that you want it to be.
Right.
And so I'm interested to see what they're going to offer when Masters comes up. But I think it's important to note how like magical it feels like it's been for this Warriors squad, where if a year ago, 2 years ago, you say that this team is going to be in a top 4 scenario playing against, you know, the Bolts, the Dragons, the Titans, and the Leviathans just weren't going to be there, that seems ludicrous.
Well, things that age pretty poorly for us. I remember we did the Caster Thoughts video, and the Oni Warriors were slated top 3 all year long for Season 8. Now we get a bit of a bailout because they weren't all able to play in studio, things like that, but finally seeing this roster come together in a way that we thought that they would. I could talk with you forever about Season 9 and the way that these teams have looked, but if you look at Game 1 and what's been happening here, it's been some thoughts of ganks early for Lasbra and Cubo Fred, but those haven't necessarily rolled through. First items of the game being completed here. Looks like Vote channeling the ultimate. Just seeing what's up, but won't end up taking that one towards anyone on the Olympus Bolts. First round of itemization being completed here, and the first scrapping of the game happening, as it looks like an obelisk invade there from Neoma and Cubo Fred was in, but they end up backing away with just a little bit of damage on the Cubo.
I was going to give a little bit more credit over. I think that the Bolts right now are doing a good job of farming, but the difference between them, like the Warriors, have a small lead, and now they're going to go for something more.
River's Rebuke from Jake really separates out the back side of this jungle. Remember, Neoma has Scarab's Blessing. Tusky onto Vote or Cubo likely would have run into Neoma, but damage just a little bit short there. And let's talk about this Artemis for a moment, Gore, because when the bow build was all of the rage, so is Artemis, right? I mean, you build that entire build, you get Silver Branch towards the end, and Artemis was just what everyone was picking. Immobility aside, Artemis just worked too well with the build at the moment. And now we're seeing her again here for Barracuda.
Silver Branch Bow is being picked up a lot more often over the last couple of weeks, right? And Artemis, like you say, just goes so well with that because your just attack stem, which first off is a really still like solid ability to have when you're all of a sudden getting attack speed and usually getting to hit harder. Back in like crit days, you go back to like season 2, season 3, she was big because, hey, I'm just gonna hit you way more in this small window. It's just the immobility that usually brings her down. But when you get Silver Branch Bow, all of a sudden it's not just an attack speed stem. All of a sudden you're getting a power spike as well every time you pop your 2. So it's not, I think, as crazy to see her get picked up. But when you consider what we've been seeing, you've seen a lot of Heimdalls, we're seeing Chernobyls, I saw Rom earlier, a lot of Jingwei conversations. All of those are, hey, we could get out of trouble really well. At the minimum, we can get out for a few seconds before having to come crashing back down. Artemis doesn't do that much. No. She gets locked down usually pretty easily. Traps are really helpful. Tusky is magical, and your relics are going to be a lot. But I think that because of the build that we've been seeing, a little bit of lifesteal into some crit, usually either into a heavy crit-handed build or getting some of that attack speed as well, then finishing off like a Deathbringer towards the very end.
Right.
I think that where Barra goes with this build is going to be maybe indicative of whether or not Artemis is like a fringe pick sometimes locked in, or if this is something that we could expect to see a little more often.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up some of the self-peel because Artemis needs it between trap. And Tusky may literally be magical. I don't know what the lore is behind Tusky, but magical boar or something, I have to imagine.
He's a Caledonian boar.
Whether that means he's magical or not, I have no clue. Caledonian boar or not, Barracuda's going to have to use Tusky throughout this game as a form of peel. And necessary when you look at some of the dives that the Oni Warriors have. I mean, Nika doesn't have Blink yet. Don't know if we'll end up getting Blink on this Kukulkan. QO Fred does have Blink. So there is setup for the Oni Warriors. There is setup as well for the Olympus Bolts. A lot of it in Awesome Jake, who has to use some of that setup as disengage here. Now a couple of times we have seen the Yemoja towards the forefront of some of these small engagements. Not much has happened, Gore. And there's still a 2,000 gold lead for the Oni Warriors. The neutral farm has all been going the Oni Warriors. And it's not often we get to shout this out, so I'm going to. 6-0 on the totem of coup count for Nika. Solo lane has felt just fine for the Oni Warriors here. XP is equal. But Nika has seemingly had most of the pressure. Top net worth in the game, 600 or so of the 2,000 gold that the Oni Warriors are in the lead is in the back pocket of Nika. Haddox needs that Golden Blade to help farm anything in that lane, it feels like, but falling a bit behind a Nika.
Another 600 of it was there for vote as well. So, I mean, 2 corners, 2 pillars of your map have been hovering up. It's only like, well, actually, it's about, hey, guess what, 600 for Dardes as well. That's where a lot of the pressure has been. So first blood would be just crucial for the Bolts.
Yeah, but how worried about this is Neo really? Scarab's Blessing makes its way onto the Scarab, and it is procced. A stun from Jake finds Neoma on the back as well. But there is no reinitiation from the Olympus Bolts. Vote had ulted over, and there was a rotation from Barracuda. And it's just the supports that get a little low, and ultimately no one dies.
I'm actually surprised, getting to 11 minutes, no kills just yet, despite
between
good attempts,
these 2 teams?
Right? I think that, I was going to say, it's interesting to see. I think the Warriors like this style, though.
Tusky.
People want something.
Tusky, help! No! Cubo Fred is CC immune, and Cubo Fred just running down Barracuda, who will be able to walk away. And that shows you what I'm talking about with some of the immobility. I mean, that's a great magnifying glass of a moment. Where actually, that's an interesting interaction, Gore, that I hadn't thought much about. If Cubo Fred just walks towards Barra in his ultimate, Tusky's not getting that much value.
And you know what? Traps aren't going to do too much either. What a good pull!
Oh, that's fantastic from Neoma to maybe snag first blood, but Awesome Jake's got another Riptide. And how many times have we seen Yemoja or Kepri down into yellow HP, but not confirmed by the other team? Too many. But the Warriors are still getting this pressure. But how about this? Pyromancer pulled by the Bolts.
Well, you should have a little bit of calling. I was going to say, I think this is exactly the right way to play it, especially now that you've got the audio cue. You go all in on this Gold Fury, but they already had the vision. You see Neil dropped a Sentry Ward. They knew there was no way that the Bolts were going to be able to look over that one, at least and see them. And so without the rotations, I think it was a couple of wards. You can see a deep Warriors ward over on the right side of mid lane. And little things like that, if you get picked up over there and they see a rotation towards a Pyromancer, It mostly keeps things even, a little bit more gold now in favor of the Warriors. And that's where not only is neutral farm getting very interesting, but we're already at the point where, you know, you're talking about late mid-game for a lot of these gods and where they are, level 14 at the cap right now for a few of these players. And with this rate, I mean, you're going to see a first blood where it's going to be a
First blood is going to turn into a fire giant.
Yeah, well, they're going to die, and it's just going to be in the blink of an eye. If they catch Barra out, all of a sudden he's gone. They catch out Vin, you know, Vote, somebody that's squishy. They're just going to die. But it feels like it's starting to hit the progression where we have to almost look at what those like full 5-on-5s are going to be. Because even though I maybe don't expect them for another, you know, 4 to 5 minutes, it does feel like this is where, you know, with the amount of rotations we've started to see, someone's going to get hands-on. Someone's looking for those picks. And it's a question of impatience versus if you can make it happen in a tasteful way, right? Getting impatient, going for a kill unnecessarily, and overextending, you're just going to die. If you go for something maybe, like I said, a little tasteful, where you can open it up, turn it into a 4v5, with no main neutral objectives other than the FG, this actually might be like the best time to die. Unfortunately, earlier it was, what, 2,000 gold for the Warriors, and I had said like if the Bolts can get first blood, that'll alleviate a little bit.
Wow.
The Warriors have just been pulling it back over in their favor consistently.
And look at where that net worth is. Same spot. It's 1,100 gold over in mid. And gets worse elsewhere. River's Rebuke is up. Gotta be a kill on Anil here, right? River's Rebuke has trapped him in place, and there's a Scarab's Blessing used onto himself, but he will dash away, just fine, detonate, just short of the damage, and somehow, yet again, we avoid first blood. As close as you can get to first blood, but still wasn't there.
Vin, okay, just now ticked over to 14, but about 2 levels, let's call it a level and a half, level 3/4 behind where Dardez is. If that gap in mid isn't 1,100 gold, Neil dies there.
Yeah.
I think, and whatever farm Dardez is getting, great on him for getting the lead, but also showcases maybe where some of the lax is on the Bolts right now. The Zeus hasn't gotten a lot going for it. Granted, the damage at this rate, we're going to be watching slowly but surely as, you know, 636, so that might literally just be that last bout of damage that he got onto Neil, and that's all that's on the board. I think that what we will see out of this Zeus as this goes on is a surprising jump. He's under 1K right now, but with the build and with the way this character works, one team fight and you're going to go up to the middle of the field here.
Yeah, I wonder if the Oni Warriors, maybe around this next Primal Fury core, want to push some of their leads at the moment. I really look at Vote and Barracuda because that's a 2-level. That's where it feels the heftiest. Then, of course, in the mid lane. 2 to 3 levels, right, between mid and ADC. Maybe I've called it, maybe not. Tusky runs into Cubo Fred, but the CC immunity delays things out. Barracuda has to drop such an important ultimate as a little bit of pressure from the Oni Warriors makes its way in, though 2 ultimates traded out by the Onis. Awesome. Jake over on left as well. Cubo Fred takes the ultimate from Lasper, goes back in, but there's a Scarab's Blessing on the other side. Cubo has been pulled back. Uses the beads. Lasbra just needs the clap to come back up. Uses the beads himself, and first blood to the Bolts after 16 minutes, but there is still fighting to be done as Nika runs through the back line, snags a root onto Barra, stun from Dardez, and goodbye carry. Double kill on over to the Oni Warriors solo laner. Lasper, though, is able to answer back.
That they get 2 big frontliners for 2 carries on the other side. They might still find more.
Lasbra's in this fight, but how much longer will he be here? Dardez chasing down the Nemesis. Lasbra looks like he'll escape. Awesome Jake, I'm not sure you can say the same. Looking for a killing spree is Nika. Looking for a triple kill is Nika. Nika gets 3. There's a 4th around the corner. Make it all 5 for Nika. Delayed penta for the man from the solo lane. Kilcullen comes up huge at 16 minutes.
We went 16 minutes with nothing, and then 9 people died.
Who else? Who else but Nika, man?
Nika's the last man standing, the only person with a 0 in the death column. What an insane rotation. And as much as I want to give him props, and I will, I have to give some props over to Qvo and Vote, just because one of those kills, specifically the one onto Barra, is made a lot easier because they get rid of Tusky, they get rid of the Aegis, they get rid of a lot of utility that Artemis could bring to that team fight. We're pretty much, same spot? A little bit more gold, maybe. That's such a topsy-turvy fight. I think Lasber being able to turn around, knowing that it would cost him his life and still get a kill, find some major pressure that stops the Warriors from potentially being able to get this Primal Fury right after that fight, going 4 for 5. Absolutely insane, but Nika comes up big, a huge set of knockups, really good control, and I think most importantly is just the target acquisition between Nika and Dardes, making sure that they're focusing the right people at the right time. It's all it takes is one swap. If Lasbra has a little more health throughout that fight, maybe it's the bolts that come out on top, things like that. And so it's a small amount of plays that results in a huge fight that ends up favoring them. And that's what happens when you wait 16 minutes to start killing people, Dave, is everyone has that propensity to just get erased off the board. And unfortunately for the, for the Bolts, that was all 5 of them.
Gore, if you were telling me there's a team, or 2 teams that are going up against one another, where the first fight of the game goes 4 for 5, nearly a double deicide, I'm assuming it's the Warriors versus the Bolts. I don't know why. Both of these teams just have the propensity to fight like this sometimes. And I believe this is where it resets. Right, so this is the first of the second 3.
And you know what? It's all Haddix's fault. And,
yeah, really
I mean that in a nice way for Bolts fans. And that is that Haddix was too damn tanky for Nika to kill. And unfortunately, that means it took him too long. And so it killed off the timer for his Penta. But at the same time, I would argue you got maybe one of the best members on your team, 5 full kills. He's got a 3-level lead over what this Horus is bringing.
He's level 20 at 19 minutes. He was level 20 before 19 minutes. And remember, there was this lead in solo building up anyway from Nika. Finally was able to make use of it. Rotates into the fight, gets a delayed 5. And now the only Warriors, I don't want to say are on easy street, but maybe you're feeling a little bit more like they're on easy street. I think Dardes also, despite only being 0-1-5, because look at the KDAs of the only Warriors. Kivo Fred was only able to affect 1 kill. Between Neoma and Vote in that one fight, only affecting 2 kills each. Dardes was there stunning and supplying damage for all 5 of the kills for the Oni Warriors. Only 2 members of the Oni Warriors able to do that in the last fight. And then, of course, Nika now remains 100% kill participation with an assist on that 6th kill, though Dardes may have gotten his 5th assist there. At any rate, I think the Morgan really added some extra chaos to that team fight as well. The stealths, the stuns looked great for Dardes. So now the deficit's gotten pretty big. And the Olympus Bolt score, going to have to look down a Fire Giant because there's no neutral objective to be fought over anymore. And it looks like the only Warriors considering maybe a Fire Giant fight, push, something like that here soon.
Well, I mean, yeah, with this amount of gold lead, the comfort I think you should have in your kill capability, you can start to force a fight. And it's only, the gold is the big difference maker because even though you've got a lot of experience going in your favor, you still have to be a little worried. And, you know, Bara, when Tusky's up, I think can absolutely change the fight. And last time around, like, they just burned that ult as well as the Aegis. Aegis still has a minute, but the ult's there. The beads are there. So I think Bara has a lot more capabilities in the next fight. But I also think Vin with the Lightning Storm has a full Ob Shard now. It's going to be a lot harder to kill off the Zeus as easily as they did. So I'm going to keep my eyes on the Warriors because I think this is going to be a good fight for them. I don't know if it's going to be an easy fight.
Remember, while we were watching the replay of the kills, and this is a really small moment, we were watching Nika's 5 kills back. Barracuda dies while that's happening. Looks like the Bolts pulled and secured the Fury just a moment ago. Because if I remember correctly, the only Warriors got the Gold Fury.
Earlier.
So I guess the Primal Fury rather goes over to the Olympus Bolts.
It cost some Bara, though.
Cost some Barracuda and a little bit of map presence. Wonder how Vote wants to play these next few moments as well. You have his ultimate. That's a nice Riptide from Awesome Jake, with some great cleave damage out from both Dardes and Vote. Pushes back the Olympus Bolt. Is that an immediate Fire Giant call? For a couple members of the Oni Warriors, yes. But remember, with Haddix, with this Horus ultimate, the Bolts don't have to just walk straight up the middle of this fight. They can kind of get into the back, depending on how they want to play the fight.
It is going to be, I think, even more interesting just because of the healing. Haddix, Jake both bring healing to the capabilities. That Fire Giant call seems an easy one for some of the Warriors. Because at the time, it seems like, and feels like, maybe a TKO onto Jake. He's half health, just dropped a lot of Omi, getting those Riptides and getting away. This is a perfect time to open it up. Well, the Omi regen pretty quickly, and also Jake has gotten back to full health, and not necessarily a blink of an eye, but fast enough that I don't think the Warriors could feel super confident in pulling it. And that's where, again, why it feels so weird. You've got a very massive gold lead, but a lot of that is falling, I want to say maybe more into solo lane than anywhere else, although you can see tier 3s that are finished now on the side of the Warriors where it's tier 2s for their counterparts or maybe just straight up full items that they might have over them. But it hasn't been spread out enough that every member of the Warriors is just blanket statement farther ahead in their builds and things like that. So the Warriors' experience is going in their favor, but that's gonna lift up soon.
Nika knocks up 3 or 4 members of the Olympus Bolts and forces out a 4-man Riptide out, but watch out, Cubo Fred has been pulled back in, has beads and double dash. Haddix up into the sky, and will crash down just to the side. A little bit of shielding, but that is it. Nice initiation from Nika, but the only Warriors want to fight around that transformation, so now that Nika has de-transformed, you imagine you see a bit of a disengage here. So, still close enough, maybe. The Olympus Bolts are that they feel like they can show some face, won't give over a Fire Giant for free here at 23 minutes.
And I think that's the thing to really factor into this is just the fighting potential from the Bolts, the damage potential from the Bolts is still massive. You know, as much gold, you can go 10K down. This is a team that at level 20 is still going to hit you hard. And I think earlier we had highlighted it was, what, like 600 for Vin? And then he did jump up quite a bit. He got 4 times that damage. Unfortunately, 2,400 still at the bottom.
Yeah, there's a lot of damage potential from
it's
Vin,
just not
right?
happening, right? But when it does, Dave, and if it happens around an FG, you don't want to be the Warrior stuck in a lightning storm.
I don't know. This is one of those weird games where it's difficult to... I feel like it's difficult to harsh on Ven. Like, nothing has been happening outside of one team fight where Ven just got jumped on early.
Yep.
Other than that, Ven has just been hanging out, holding onto the lightning storm. You're right. The build, and we say it jokingly, but I actually think it holds some water. The potential for damage, regardless of what the chart currently shows.
He's
Absolutely
the boulder
there for Ven.
teetering on the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, and which way it gets pushed is kind of up to the only
It
Warriors
could
at
just
this
sit
point.
there. It might not do anything.
Could do nothing.
It is just a boulder.
It is, after all, right. It's up to the Oni Warriors, I suppose, to either push the boulder back off the edge or let it roll downhill. But playing slowly, nonetheless, is the mindset here. Though the Oni Warriors do get the Oni Fury, Pyromancer is going to spawn up shortly. Teams usually don't back away from that objective, a much smaller, less risky objective. But it's actually the Fire Giant taking some swings right now. Might just be testing the Olympus Bolts and their reaction time. Also could be baiting them in for a fight.
You have to watch Dardes in fights like this, similar to late game.
Oh, it's
Anytime
getting low.
Morgan, if you're invisible, you can get in the back line, Bara, Vin.
Vote.
That's a lot of death.
Vote does a lot of damage. This is all Vote on the Fire Giant into the back
Watch
line.
Dardes.
Goes Nika, who is on a 5-killing spree. Lightning Storm goes down, and so does Dardes. Haddix can reinitiate. Put some shielding onto the rest of his team as Nika running for the hills. The Olympus Bolts have bought their time. Nika, tick down, needs a Fire Giant to attack him, but it won't. Scarab's Blessing times out, and the Olympus Bolts have gotten a couple of kills, and now it looks like the Olympus Bolts may get themselves an FG as well. What has just happened? The Bolts are right back in game 1.
Oh my god, that might have been one of the smartest calls I've ever seen. I wish it had worked out. That just like run up to the Fire Giant, like, kill me, please! Get me out of here, just proc it, I need to get pulled. Unfortunate, and that's the problem. I think when you jump in on the Bolts, right? So far, every fight, the main fight that we saw, Bara did not have Aegis, Bara did not have ult. I didn't get to catch much of what happened around that Primal Fury, but I do know Bara walked out of it sans ult, sans Aegis, right? So a lot of it has been, cool, Nika, go pressure out Bara, make his utility disappear, and then we can fight. This time, it's like, cool, Nika, go pressure out Bara, get rid of his utility, and then we can fight. The downside is that when they went to pressure out Bara, you get a Lightning Storm and an immediate turn on the Darts.
This would be big, Gorf. You can get a Fire Giant buff off of Cubo Fred, but the collapse in from the Oni Warriors turns things around. It's actually Lasbra that gets the Fire Giant buff off of himself, trying too much as Cubo Fred survives, and the rest of the Oni Warriors rotate in. How impactful could that be, though?
Huh.
And you know what? That kind of turns me around. Maybe I'm surprised, because usually it's the team without the Fire Giant buff that's looking to make those quick 1v1 plays, steal a buff away. But that's Lasbra just trying to open up a door for his team, and it immediately closes.
And around, so it's wild in multiple regards. It's around a tier 1. you're mostly by yourself. Like, it just felt like there wasn't a lot that should have happened over there. I think that the Bolts had an ample opportunity to just sit back, regroup. This might be one of the, and I'm trying to word this a nice way, but I can't think of it. It might just be a useless FG buff for the next 2 minutes. I mean, you've got 2 minutes to work with, right? That's a long time for a power play, a long time to try and get things back in your favor.
Which takes a minute off, right?
But
I mean,
yeah, like you've burned time. You're still waiting on Lasbra. Lasbra now no longer has it, so diving these towers is a little more difficult. You have left lane pushed up all the way. You've already got the towers over and right, and mid's pushed up to the tower line. So realistically, unless the Bolts want to go deep diving into a deficit, the Warriors still have the gold lead, and the Warriors still have a menacing fight despite the fact that the Bolts just won one. It's not really a safe decision to go forward. I honestly, if they even get a tier 2 with this buff, it feels like it's going to be like the most that they can pull out of it.
I wonder, yeah, how much wind that takes out of the Olympus Bolts sails. I mean, Oni Warriors still realizing this is not a great opportunity. I mean, you're still in the lead, but Fire Giant buff makes a big difference. Likely not putting up too much of a fight around a tier 1 tower anyway.
I think if they want, they could defend the tier 2. Yeah. I don't think they need to, but they could.
I wouldn't hate a step up from the Oni Warriors just to see. That's a damage check, the Olympus Bolts, see how things look. That said, if you lose a fight with still a minute left on the Fire Giant buff and only 1 tower left on the map, at this point you lose the game if you're the Oni Warriors and you overstep. I think they realize the same and will back themselves up towards their Phoenix.
That's what's it's so difficult when you've had so little team fights, is trying to figure out exactly what you want to expect. Haddox is going to go in there.
Whoa, Nika's found the backline, but Nika has found a whole lot of damage awaiting. Scarab's Blessing up, but again, Nika will live. Scarab's Blessing not needed. Barracuda wails away on Neoma as the Scarab's Blessing might have been needed on the Scarabs. The Olympus Bolts will end this game likely behind in gold, likely just up in kills. And now there's 3 members of the Oni Warriors left fighting. Cubo Fred into the back, but Barracuda has more than enough damage. It's a Rivers Rebuke from Awesome Jake to delay out this fight. Voden's got to backpedal away. Cubo Fred has got a body block. And for now, Vote still has enough HP. But now the Titan gets pulled out by the Olympus Bolts. Awesome Jake is low. He's taking all the damage, but Vote, he oversteps, is able to get himself into the wall and out of it. The Titan not burning as quick as the Bolts would have hoped, but surely they've got enough damage. Surely now that Vote has died and the Bolts turn around game 1.
I think that one comes down to I don't even know where to limit it. I think that Fire Giant ends up being a huge deal, and it's just the engage. Nika goes in, and the last 2 times we see that jump in, he loses all of his health in the blink of an eye. It costs relics for the carries, yeah, but at the end of the day, if Barra and Vin are still alive, the damage output with the builds they had is going to be massive. And yeah, are they easy to kill? They're easy to sit on. But if they can live through that initial dive, everything was smooth sailing. The first time that fight goes the way the Warriors, 9 people die, Nika gets into the back, knocks up a massive amount of people, but kills Barra, kills Vin very early on. Then it's the other 3.
And think about how the Oni Warriors lost the fight that gave the Bolts the Fire Giant. It was the same. It was Dardes and Nika in the back line. They get melted through, and then the Warriors just lose the fight. Same thing happens around the Phoenix, and the Bolts somehow fight back, and they take game number 1. Olympus Bolts strike first. Time for the Oni Warriors to swing back. Game number 2 coming up next.
Clear. How my baby's running this a block cause you fear what you do to you if you get dirty hands and veneer. What you do, what she is, little boy, I tell you this. If baby wants sit, she can sit. If baby says lit, it's lit. Got your bank account and I cute. If she said it loud, it's the truth. If baby wanna ride, she can ride. If baby needs some time, she got time. Got your bank account and I cute. She can make it count, how about you? She would put you in the bag, wouldn't even need a planet. If she wanted, she a magnet. They should let her name a planet. Everything she drop like Corona, viral, make the world start over like I own her. She ain't about to set, but the sure that you all know. Baby wants sit, she can sit. If baby says lit, it's lit. Got your bank account and I cute. If she said loud, it's the truth. If baby wanna ride, she can ride. Baby needs some time, she got time. Got your bank account and I cute. She can make it count, how about you? She be always making money, if it's raining, if it's sunny. She make time to call me honey every day. Drop a couple bands on the cook, they need pay. Then a couple more on the tip, baby saves. Body's just the everyday, imagine holiday. If I get the 50 cents, she get me holidays. Signing with the fly, if you meet her, know it's true. So if she ever asks you, you know that baby wants sit, she can sit. If baby says lit, it's lit. Got your bank account and I cute. If she said loud, it's the truth. If baby wanna ride, she can ride. Baby needs some time, she got time. Got your bank account and I cute. She can make it count, how about you?
Welcome back. The Olympus Bolts are able to claw their way into a victory in game number 1. And with that, how that game started, I mean, we went, what, 16, 17 minutes, nobody dying, a couple of near misses. Nika gets a delayed pentakill in one team fight later where 9 people total die. But when it comes down to the objective play in the team fights, into these late game battles here in Mifflin, it's the Olympus Bolts who come out on top.
Yeah, that is just composition diff come late game, and that's exactly what we were talking about in the initial death segment. Once the Olympus Bolts were allowed to group up as 5, once that Shiva started to fall off, wasn't quite able to work his way into that backline, Zeus was allowed the space to do whatever he wants. Artemis, although immobile, still had enough CC immunity and enough threat generated that you couldn't really just have Nico walk him down, you couldn't really just have Cuvo Fred in the backline on their own, and the Olympus Bolts able to very, well, I wouldn't say easily, but once they got to those late game team fights, I would say with relative ease, take the advantage. It really did just come down to the Oni Warriors not quite capable of pushing an early game lead. Cuvo Fred doesn't get involved as early as I think the Warriors would have liked. And, well, Shiva just falls off after 15 minutes.
And this is where we finally see the turnaround from the Bolts. Sure, we had the team fight prior that went 5 for 4 or whatnot here.
Watch this.
But this is the big turnaround kill
Walk
right
into the
here.
fire pit, man.
Nika tries to get the Fire Giant to proc the pool, and instead
there was a
doesn't
pool
get
there
anything.
already.
I'm with you there. It's literally sitting there. Maybe he didn't realize
He walked past
how
it.
long it was going to be sitting there, so maybe he didn't think it would do enough damage, and
He needed one tick.
it just wasn't enough. He ends up dying right after there, and that's that turnaround point. Here, at least for the Olympus Bolts, is maybe the folly of Nika unable to proc a Scarab's Blessing.
Yeah, one delayed pentakill for Nika, and that's all the kills that he had gotten throughout the course of that one. 5-1 still. A very admirable slash line, so will look good on my fantasy team, but maybe not so good for the Oni Warriors win-loss.
No, will not be, at least in that category here. But it's only game number 1, Mifflin. It's a best of 5. There's still at least 4 more chances for the Oni Warriors. Well, 4 total if you include. You got to get 2 to bring it to another, and then you could still lose the 3rd chance and then win on the 4th one.
So at least 2.
At least 2. There'd be 4
Yeah,
total.
there's not it's at most 4.
Oh, sure. At most 4, at least 2. Dang. You got me there. Dang. I was thinking for
Hey,
some
I got
reason
you.
that's wording like we're going even further beyond a best of 5. That would be absolutely insanity here. Nika, though, near top of the damage charts, along with Vote right there, right behind him. As the Warriors did control the game for the most part. I mean, all the way up until that Fire Giant blunder there. The Oni Warriors did have control of that game, but and as you said at the beginning of the death segment, before going into a game, and as you alluded to earlier on, just a team fight for the Olympus Bolts to come out on top. And now as we get ready to kind of get jumping in towards game number 2, is there any real adjustments that you need to see as far as the draft or as far as the composition is concerned here for the Oni Warriors now as we jump into Picks and Bans game 2?
Yeah, I think the Oni Warriors essentially tried to double dip in the style of composition. They had a very strong early game outside of the mid lane. The Morrigan just really does take a very long time to be allowed to play how she wants to get those one-shots in the back line. Had they just picked a much more aggressive mid lane mage, I think that would have created the space and allowed for Cuvo Fred to have a lane that he can consistently rotate into and try and put pressure on. But because they have a unorthodox late-game slanted mage with an early-game draft built around her, well, you weren't quite capable of playing through mid. And, well, the Bolts slowed down the duo lane, didn't really want to take too many fights throughout the early. It's very difficult in general to gank solo. So I think if the Oni Warriors want to reprise essentially 4/5 of their draft from game 1, the only adaptation I would want to see is in the Morrigan.
Well, we'll see if that's the change up here. As far as the bans are concerned, though, the Morrigan will be taken away by the Bolts. The Emoja will also be taken away by the Bolts here alongside that Ardeo. And then Nox and Zeus on the opposite side. And now that leaves the question, do you ban the E-set away from the Bolts? The answer to that for the Warriors is no. It'll be a Kleena. 3rd and final ban on the side of the Warriors. So that does leave the E-set open for either of these two teams to take it here. Bolts more likely to take it towards the support role. Warriors, though, we've been seeing a lot more of the E-set mid.
Yeah, I very quickly have become I was an E-set support lover, but now I think I might prefer to see her in mid just because of what she is capable of around objectives, man. I mean, Lono's Mask just really mitigates one of the greatest strengths of E-set, being that ability to walk to a Gold Fury at 5 minutes, decimate it, walk to Pyromancer at 10 minutes, decimate it, rinse, repeat for the entirety of the match until you get to the point of the game where it's time to team fight, except the team with E-set probably by nature of just getting all the neutral objectives will naturally pull ahead. But it won't be the E-set locked in first overall. Instead, it's Daji, a pick that generally we like to see a little bit later on in the draft so that you can use it as a counter to some of these guys that don't have CC immunity inherently within the kit. Instead, though, the Bolts say, hey, no matter what, I'm at least forcing an ultimate, right? I'm at least forcing some CC immunity in some regard, and you're still very high DPS. You're very good around objective play. Daji having bleed on her auto attacks means that she is very adaptable to walk towards objectives, make that burn that much more powerful, very high burst potential as well. So not too concerned with it, but generally you would want to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, so with that Daji locked in, a lot of picks up for the Warriors. E-set being hovered right now. And as we said, definitely towards that mid lane for Dardes here has been kind of the focus on this god for this team here. Also to note that with that E-set being locked over to there, the Chernobog was a first pick last time around for the Oni Warriors. Doesn't seem that, at least as of yet, they're going to put that same level of stock into that God. And with Jing Wei up and available as well, there's a lot of hunters that could be going this way. But the only words will make me eat my words there. Instead of the first person locked in being the Churbok, it'll be the second one here in this top 2.
So it's going to bring the exact same stuff that we saw in Game 1, a slightly slow laning phase. If Barracuda wants to go back towards that Artemis, pretty easy to use the Vengeful Assault, the second ability, the Artemis Stim, to use that additional movement speed to avoid the route from Chernobog. So I think maybe an opportunity there. 1v1's generally going to favor the Artemis as well. Chernobog instead locked in for his global presence and ability to get involved elsewhere on the map. ESET getting picked up early will act as flex potential, but if history's any indicator, the Oni Warriors are more likely to take it towards mid, which was the one issue that I had with their previous draft, a relatively low pressure mid laner. ESET is anything but. She is incredibly high pressure, has great wave clear, phenomenal level 1 through 5, very early pressure, very early kill potential as well. We saw Paul find a 1v1 up against Pagon in a counter matchup up against Susano. So I think if the Oni Warriors so choose, maybe could look towards that Shiva yet again and try and play around this ESET.
I think it's interesting to note that in set number 1 of our day, Gilgamesh was so heavily prioritized on being a ban for both the Dragons and then the Titans as well. Game number 1, we didn't see it at all. We saw Nemesis locked in ahead of time. Now the Staji on the side of the Bolt. Even the Warriors kind of bypassed that by grabbing the Shiva. Now with Daji locked in, Gilgamesh still an option for the Bolts if they want to throw it over into that solo lane. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the potential that it could go to support role. We saw that in the SCC for a brief while. At least put the damper on that pick over there, at least as far as the solo is concerned, is Cthulhu Poseidon. But do the Warriors now have the option here to maybe go ahead and pick up that Gilgamesh themselves? And do you think it would be one that would fit well for this comp?
Yeah, I would love Gilgamesh. I think Gilgamesh, personally, and this is a personal statement, I'm not making a statement on the relative power rankings or maybe the opinions of the pros, but I personally believe Gilgamesh is just a much more consistent version of Shiva. Shiva's main weakness being that after you get to around the 15-minute mark, once you're level 12, get that second relic available, he really does start to fall off. Feels like he's mostly relegated to using that ultimate as essentially a pseudo-meditation for his team or an escape as additional CC immunity. Whereas Gilgamesh, even if you do fall behind in the early, Winds of Shamash is just such a strong team fight tool that it's consistent. And you also have some of the strongest early game potential to gank. I mean, level 2, Shiva might just be the best in the game right now. Erlong Shen pre-rework was pretty high up there as well, but Gilgamesh similarly, just with like a full second stun at level 2, is just so powerful as well as the slow. Instead though, it is Ymir locked in. Great matchup into both Cthulhu and Poseidon immediately. Cthulhu has no way to deal with those walls, can make it very easy for the Oni Warriors to stop the initiation of the Olympus Bolts or slow down the chase potential that Descent into Madness affords you. Even Poseidon, I mean, he goes fast. He's a fast god. He does not have any leaps. That Ymir going to make it very difficult for Poseidon to maneuver around the jungle.
Yeah, he'll move real fast into the wall head first. That might cause some need for even things like a Phantom Shell. Typically, we see that more so reserved when you're going against Yamojas or Odins. But there have been some games where Ymir pressure is just too much, and we do end up seeing Phantom Shells go that way. The bans are finally starting to roll in by these teams. A little bit of time taken there by the Warriors. But Artemis and Ares banned away. And we always kind of talk about Daji as like assassin version of Ares when it comes to that ultimate, you know, ultimate from Ares, no escape, grab as many people as you can, burn all those beads away. Daji, very similar here, so taking away a second version of that might be a smart call here by the Warriors. And it'll be Shiva and Nemesis on the side of the Bolts, so a couple of junglers now taken away from the Warriors.
Yeah, I really like that Ares ban, because as of now, the Bolts don't really have any consistent beads burning tools outside of the Daji. Cthulhu generally not going to be forcing out those beads very consistently. Sure, Descent to Madness is a whole lot of CC, but it's a whole lot of small CCs, a whole lot of subsequent what am I looking for? In a sequence starts with a C.
Subsequently?
No, starts with a C. Whatever, man. Like when things happen in a row, he does a lot of knockups in a row, okay? And they're all very small CCs. So if you dedicate beads to just one of them, you're immediately getting knocked up yet again, which means, although consecutive.
There we go.
Thank you very much. So consecutive knockups means that if you beads the first one, you're losing the value of your relic regardless, which means that generally these pros will not be using beads against Cthulhu. Atlas, on the other hand, he's going to be burning beads pretty consistently, Daji as well. So now the Olympus Bolts, diversifying their CC, have got the opportunity to make use of these burnt beads. Looking at the Oni Warriors, though, the only one who doesn't have CC immunity hard baked into the kit is this E-set. That said, I don't think you're feeling too bad if E-set's your target.
Not the same way, though. I'm looking over at this Atlas and Jingwei picked up. Jingwei can use the ultimate to get over the side.
What's wrong with me?
It's okay, man. We all have those moments out here. It happens to the best of us. But I'm looking back over here. Jingwei's still the only god on this composition. Adachi, if she's got like a minion or maybe has to use the Palau. The only god having to use an ultimate here to get past this Ymir wall. Atlas will still struggle with something like that. And the Oni Warriors lock in Raven, not the god that I would have thought over here in towards the jungle. But definitely a pick that is no stranger here for Cuvo Fred.
Yeah, it brings you a lot of early pressure, has essentially beads and Aegis built into the kit with overhead kick, a very strong ability. Will help you out a lot against things like the Daji or even the Atlas. Going to be very difficult for either of those two gods to apply CC to this Raven. I would argue as well, doesn't fall off as hard as something like the Shiva would, because if you are going towards full damage, which I believe we will likely see from this Raven, you're still dealing like upwards of 800 to 900 damage with your ultimate. You're still benefiting from the passives of it, which will help your survivability. You've got very strong early game presence that can match up very well with this E-set. The third ability, acting as CC from a range, will set up for the Chernobog very well. I really do like this Oni Warriors draft, and it's got a whole lot of dive potential, which should make it a little bit more difficult for Poseidon specifically to survive some of these fights. You're not too worried about Daji, Palau removing you from the playfield and getting you over walls means it's going to be pretty difficult to lock her down. And, well, Jingwei's Jingwei. That's like the safest hunter, besides Heimdall.
Yeah, that's fair. We've gone into length about the safety of the different hunters and which ones you kind of rank in that order there. Heimdall, Jingwei, and then I think Hachiman was kind of your next one on that list there.
Those are the three safe ones. Those are the three I hate laning against.
Because you could just never do anything. They box you. Okay, now you have to go back to base. You box them. Well, they just come right back to lane. No problem here. But looking back at this Kakula, I mean, Nika started off with a delayed pentakill on this god here for the Warriors in game number 1. Got to the team fights. Maybe not so great at the very end of here, but how do you feel about this Kakulin once again for this Oni Warriors team in game 2 now, Mifflin?
Well, it's so hard to argue against a 5-1 performance, right? But Kakulin's relative value in the entirety of Smite, I think, is pretty low. He doesn't deal as much damage as some of these other backline disruptors. He's got conditional CC in that you need to be on point with the rage transformations. That said, I take it for granted. I think Nika will be on point with that, but his ability to dive into the backline, I think, is the main reason the Oni Warriors continually go towards this pick. But his ability to dive things like Zeus are pretty high. His ability to dive things like Poseidon, who have just got so much movement speed, a little bit lower.
Well, we'll see if the Oni Warriors can pull it back here in game number 2, or the Bolts going to start off to a 2-0 lead. Let's find out right now.
And we get some fun picks to look forward to going into game 2 as well, as the Oni Warriors controlled the majority of game number 1 as far as a gold lead goes. But outside of that first fight, Gore, which was only a 1-kill difference, I feel like the Olympus Bolts had some good footing underneath themselves.
That's a weird way to, not a weird way.
Right.
It's
How
one of those,
weird
like,
that in a fight with
accurate.
like a technical pentakill.
And like 9 deaths, 9
Right.
people died. Only 1 person was left
always,
alive afterwards.
you know, I've actually
also,
never,
it was 16 minutes into the game.
I've also never experienced that. Surprisingly, in all the Smite I've played, I've never experienced a deicide and then 4 of my teammates dying and just being the only one on a map for a little while. I feel like I'd be overwhelmed with all of the things that I could go and do while nobody's on the map.
Was it season 7?
And I just end up going back and doing nothing.
And I think it was season 7 we got the double deicide. Do you remember that? Like
No.
when all 10 players had died.
Or
and
we've
there was-
watched that. Well, I should remember something. I was going to say we've watched so much Smite since then.
We have watched a lot of
That
Smite.
said, I should probably remember something like that happening. No, but that is funny. I'd have to imagine like abilities or DOTs or something deal the last bit of damage in a moment like that. Near double deicide in game number 1. And Nika back on the pick. That got him a pentakill. Whereas Haddix now takes a swap over to the Cthulhu Gore. And the question around Cthulhu is always, does the enemy team have the picks to burn through that health bar later on in the game? I do think Vote will get there, as most ADCs would. Nice freeze from Neoma, but Awesome Jake still has the pull. This is going to be a slow burn, but yeah, Neoma's going to take a lot of damage. Lasbra was over on left. Haven't seen the old level 2 gank from Lasbra in a minute. I don't think he's walked over a ward, so it just depends how forward Neoma and Vote get, but tired of waiting. Lasbra Looks like he'll head on back to me. Can't decide. Canceled his back 3 or 4 separate times. This time it'll stick. But the question ends up being, Gore, outside of vote, you know, is Dardes going to have the damage to melt down this Cthulhu? Does Cuvo Fred, Mystic Rush, does that help out enough? Little things like that could add up. I think Haddox could be a problem.
Yeah, I feel like we've almost walked, I want to say, into a similar corner for the Warriors as it was last game, where I think their early game potential, and a lot of potential around objectives. I think Dardes brings a massive swing for this team around objectives. But when it gets to those late game team fights, I think there's maybe a little less burn that can happen on Tanika. No Zeus makes it a little easier for him to exist back there than, you know, like a Poseidon. But one good Kraken could change everything.
That's a pull in from Awesome Jake, but Neilma right there on the other side to answer back. Both supports again low over on the dual lane side of the map. I like this. I like the Ymir pick here for Neilma, Gore, because if I'm remembering some of the last games we've seen the Oni Warriors play, one of them was Ymir for Neo, and it looked really, really solid. It seemed like everything was just hitting for Neo all game long. And that increases the potential for this pick in my mind. But the desk also talked about how the wall can be so disruptive. Look at Ven, no movement abilities. Haddox with the Cthulhu can be things like that. Could be big difference makers for
I think
Warriors.
it's just like Lasbra, and it's a conditional, right? Like Lasbra can get past the wall if there's an enemy or a friendly on the other side that he can then use his dash to, right? Otherwise, every person is going to get locked down one way or another. So the Bolts, I think, have a lot to worry about over there. You can already see the shell being picked up for Jake. I would not be surprised if that gets upgraded. I'd say like maybe 2 good walls from Neil. That back is when it becomes a phantom shell. Like all it takes is 2 really good walls, and you realize that everything can fall apart. And so I think that it's going to be a very important pick for them. Neil has already showcased like moments where he's been able to slow down at least where Jake's presence is. But I think that's one that it's going to be fun to watch, because when you look at Atlas, he brings a lot to the table. I mean, not only does that pull feel really solid if you get it with the Astrolabe on the ground, but also just straight up his gravity pull feels awesome when you pick people up. Very similar to a Fenrir Chomp, right? A lot of these guys have played the Fenrir, so they know how the ult works. Get close. You're a lot tankier than you would be, you know, if you were playing something like an Assassin. Hug them real tight. You pick them up, and then you get to toss them back towards your team. I think it's something that Jake is going to be able to set up easily for Bera, you know, later on if he goes for crit. He'll be able to find a lot of free damage there, but also the Kraken that Vin has. So team fight potential, I think, for the Bolts has a very high. Now, granted, a lot of that is very conditional, very difficult to execute. Right. And so it is going to make it, I think, a little more nuanced for how they end up approaching the Warriors and how they try to take them down. Otherwise, right now, I think this Warriors pace, I don't want to say like benefits them. I still think they have a good late game, but I think their early game could be strong. I think last game their early game could have been strong, and they found leads, but I think they could have pushed it a lot harder and gotten something much more substantial, which I realize sounds ridiculous. They were up like 6K gold at some point, but the team fight from the Bolts is still something to be worried about.
Oni Warriors are up 1K gold right now. Could be an earlier fight as a 3 versus 3 walked out on the blue buff on the right side of the map, but the Bolts drop down their own blue, and Haddox will pick it up just fine. You do expect some early pressure, though, I think, Gore, from Cuvo Fred on this Robin. Not a pick we get to often see out of the jungle. We've seen a lot more Daji presence in picks advance than we have the Robin. But what we do know and what we do remember about Robin is that we call it a bridge pick. Sort of the early to mid game is when Cuvo Fred wants to get active. And so some early opportunities here for maybe the Oni Warriors jungle to start to make some magic, because we didn't see much from either of the 2 junglers Gore outside of that one fight in game 1.
Yeah, really, it kind of came down to, okay, what are the solo laners doing? How much space is, like, specifically Nika creating? And then what happens with the carries? Where's their damage numbers, right? What are they doing with that? So as much as I still think, yes, this Kakulin, good dive, good potential to disrupt team fights, I want to see something out of Cuvo, and I'd like to see it sooner rather than later. I think he has the leniency that it doesn't have to start right now. But I do think that they have a lot of potential to really get things rolling. I mean, at least, you know, making Vin feel uncomfortable. I think at this point, you also have to factor in having a Blink versus an Aegis. Like, if I go in on a Poseidon and I'm Robin, if my 2 is down or if I don't think I can time it well enough, that Kraken's going to hurt. But you've got immunity, right? So theoretically, you should be able to blink in. If he goes for the Kraken, you just go ahead, pop your immunity, eat that damage, and shrug it off. Go for the root, get the chase down, and then you should be able to, at the minimum, force Vin to feel super uncomfortable, get rid of the beads and the ult. At best, you get a kill. And so I think there's a lot of potential, but they don't even need it right now.
Wall up from Neoma. Counters out the pull in from Awesome Jake. Small bit of interaction there. That's maybe the first time I've seen that.
Same.
And Gore, I guess, you know, if we are being fair to Cubo Fred, maybe in Lasbra, Ven is like maybe the only one who I want to gank right now.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think there's anybody else I want to.
Like
dive.
I don't think
it's just
I'm not
Poseidon.
ganking or diving. Descent into Madness, Cthulhu. Nope. Jingwei is so safe. Atlas has the ability to just run out of lane. Cubo Fred might just have, like, if you are ganking early in this game, if you are not team fighting, might only be Ven. Freeze from Neoma, though, answered back by a pull from Awesome Jake. Kraken goes up, doesn't find much. Olympus bolts disengage. Is it enough of a disengage, though, for the Oni Warriors to rally around the Gold Fury? No, just the Oracles get taken.
We get to have, I think, multiple conversations. One, great walls from Neil. You had mentioned the Ymir earlier. I think that's something that the Warriors are going to be able to leverage pretty hard throughout this game. I don't even know if Poseidon's one that I particularly want to gank, right? Like, you're in this weird position where it's like, you know what, you can, and I think there's potential. But yeah, like you said, I don't want to dive a Circle of Protection E-set, especially with the way that a Spirit Bottle can go. And we're also in a fun conversation that Vin with the Kraken could be able to find something more.
Neil uses his ultimate.
He use ult.
He use ult. Honestly, that's probably how Ymir would
keep
talk.
live.
That's honestly how Ymir would talk. But point being, Lasbra sends his ult out, and Neoma answers with his in kind. There are a lot of interactions, I think, for Cubo Fred with the overhead kick here in this game. Now, whether it's Palau, whether it's Kraken, maybe that's why you see a Robin pick a bit later in the draft. Some of those, some of those immediate interactions, Cubo Fred has a bit of an answer to. So whether early game, mid game, what have you, is when Cubo Fred gets active. Maybe really it's just a good counter pick to some of the threats that the Oni Warriors are throwing out, as Doug shows us. About a 1,500 gold lead is already built up for the Oni Warriors. Nothing different from game one, where early pressure, early farm, going the way of the Warriors. Nika has a bit of a lead. Slight lead for Venenu, that said, as far as experience goes. And it is slight, about 20 XP per minute. So this could be a collapse from both teams. Awesome Jake has a route. Maybe catch out Neoma. Wall goes up, prevents the pull immediately, but Ven jumped on by Cubo Fred. Overhead kick works. Kraken out. Ven lives on the back as Vote now turns around the damage towards Lasbra, who has to go up into the Palau. Chain one connects onto Cubo, and I don't think he has overhead kick. There's a fantastic circular protection, and Neoma traps Lasbra in place, and after all that, first blood to the Onis.
And that comes, I mean, Neil just delivers that for them. I think that goes back and forth. Vin almost dies a good Kraken just after an overhead kick from Cubo, so he knew that it would peel for himself. Makes sure to create some space. All of a sudden, they're falling back. And I think it's just a difference of who's getting shot at and who's not. I mean, Vote takes a lot of damage. Bera's throwing it over towards him. But if they had been able to weave those shots towards, like, Cubo, first blood goes to the bolts. Maybe the Warriors end up having to fall back. Otherwise, Lasbra caught out. Wall is really good. And there's no way to try and get over that one. So the Warriors get their first blood. They get to continue this early game oppression. And we get to see how wonky these fights can be. And I think being pulled into a circle of protection, I think Darda's mastermind is what I want to call
That's smart,
it. Right?
yeah.
Like,
that's
just
a
like,
smart play.
hey, I'm going to throw my circle of protection. You're going to deal damage. It's going to charge this up. And then the people that do get pulled are going to get a burst heal at the end of it. So we'll be just fine through this Palau, even if things don't go our way. And maybe there's some counterplay in that as the game goes on throughout the duration of team fights, but that's also going to come into the equation when it comes down to conversations around securing a Fire Giant, securing a Gold Fury. You know, there's a Kraken on the other side, so it's not like the bolts are going to be easily shrugged off.
Wow, that's tough. Kraken versus Circle of Protection on objective secure. Maybe does that just come down to timing? I suppose it might.
A lot of it's just timing.
Like a fully charged...
I think a late game fully charged Circle of Protection, and granted, I'm going to go ahead and preface this with, there's been a lot of number changes to these. I want to say that a late game fully charged Circle of Protection E-set will confirm it faster than a Kraken will, or earlier, I guess. You can pop it earlier and get the kill.
Yeah, right. As far as like cast time goes,
yes.
right?
Well, like you can drop it earlier, it'll charge faster, and I think the damage is going to be higher, so that you can do something like this, pull a Gold Fury, and feel a lot more confident.
Well, this time it works out. Circle Protection gives the Oni Warriors the Gold Fury and a 3,000 gold lead. It was about 1,500 for a while, and then a big downswing thanks to the recent fight. And kill. Cuvo Fred has used overhead kick. Doesn't have beads, but does have the damage to win this trade onto Lasbra. Kraken goes up. Neoma in the ultimate. This time he is going to get pulled back in, and Lasbra answers back. The Olympus Bolts have found themselves a kill. But Cuvo Fred around the wall, misses the root, has some good damage onto Lasbra, and again overhead kick gets used early. Ultimate channeled though by Vote. Nika blinks forward on the back. This is a chase from the Oni Warriors. Barracuda dashing away. Venenu, the obvious target to jump in onto, but what is the damage that's returned onto Cuvo Fred? Awesome Jake may just be the sacrifice, but he has turned it around as well, and the Olympus Bolts, they'll keep everyone on the map alive, and now Haddock score on the reinitiation.
And this is what they need. They need something big from Haddox to create an opportunity for them.
How about the Tier 1 tower dive? The Oni Warriors backpedaling away, but it looks like maybe the Olympus Bolts have done too much. Now Jake dodges out the Spirit Ball, and Jake will live as well. How no one dies in that engagement is beyond me. It's only Neoma who dies, but remember, that's not really a part of that chase. Neoma respawned and fought back in by the end of that, and it's just the one kill for the Olympus Bolts, though we went all the way up and down the duo lane.
Yeah, and so at the grand scheme, that fight is one kill for Gold Fury. And it's a support for your Gold Fury. Like, that's the trade-off that you most of the time want to make, right? If you're going to lose anybody, ideally you don't lose anyone, but if you have to lose someone, you'd rather lose your support, and the team gets the Gold Fury. So the Warriors still get a big win in that circumstance, and they burn both of the relics from Vin, so I think a lot more opportunities created to potentially create some turmoil in the mid lane up against this Poseidon. But we're starting to see where the damage can really fly out. There was a point while the Warriors were aggressing, Bera, who has finished that Wind Demon, hit a really fat crit, and it did just enough that all of a sudden, I don't know if we want to chase this anymore, right? The Warriors have to back off, and that in and of itself, I think, is a huge eye-opener for them. So this Jing Wei showcasing that as this game goes on, the better it's going to be for the Bolts. I think that we're seeing a Poseidon, right? Pythagoras piece, like, they don't have a ton just yet, but we are starting to see, I think, some good damage being built up between Vin and Bera. And with the presence that Haddox can bring just from that fight, yeah, maybe it's not enough to dive the Tier 1, but I think that overall in like jungle fights, the Warriors are going to have to be just as worried about it, despite the lead they have, as they were last game.
It's another game for Ven, where Ven was on Zeus. So now another game for Ven with one of these immobile mids that has a giant circular damaging ultimate, right? And the build remains, I believe, the same, if I'm remembering back to game one properly. It was Doom Orb, and I think Pythag's piece in game one, followed some pen a little bit later on for Ven. And the build now following a similar path. Should be strong for Venenu, who has gotten one assist so far in this game. The one kill of Dardes came earlier on the one pick that the Oni Warriors were able to grab. So we approach the 15-16 minute mark here in game two, much the same as we did the 15-16 minute mark in game number one, without a large clash between these two teams, unless you count the chase on the duo lane side. But one where the Oni Warriors kind of gore the Bolts, but the Bolts were able to get 4 in trade. Wonder if the Bolts are okay with the pacing of this game, just having their eyes on the lake.
It's this weird dynamic where I don't think they're upset by it, but I definitely don't think that
it's too far behind.
I was gonna say it's a weird balance. That 2,000 gold means way more early on than it's going to mean in like the next 4 minutes, right? 2,000 gold at 20 minutes. is the same, I would argue, as like 1,000 at maybe 10, although maybe even less
Well,
than
1,000 of it is Nico over Haddix. So
and that was the same as last time.
So you can cut the gold lead in half outside of the solo lane, I suppose.
Oh, in that case, it means nothing and everything's even. And honestly, I think even, and I'm willing to say this, I think Nika, his dive potential is higher because of the level advantage. I don't think it negatively impacts Haddix. I think Haddix can still do Cthulhu things. The biggest difference is going to be survivability, right? He's a little less tanky than he would be otherwise. And so it does, like, suck, just straight up, that you aren't doing as much for your team, maybe in terms of frontline potential. But you still have Descent into Madness. It's still a huge disruptor for team fights. And so I think right now, you could call it maybe carte blanche even, just because where the biggest lead isn't as big a deal as it could be.
Another 600 or 700 gold or so is the difference between Cuvo Fred, who is above Lasbra, but when you put those two together, 1,600 of the gold differential is spoken for. Barracuda very close to Vote this game. That's different from game one. Remember, Vote at points was 3 levels ahead of Barracuda, and eventually the Artemis reached critical mass anyway. It put down the Oni Warriors by the end of that game. That's good damage onto Lasbra. Barely makes it over the wall. That would have been some read from Neoma had that wall blocked out the dash. But now the Oni Warriors are able to pull themselves this Primal Fury. Around the back goes Lasbra, but Lasbra is low. Circle of protection not used. The Oni Warriors get the Primal Fury, but now Haddix is walking into the back on a reinitiation, has a double knock-up, but then there's a double pull-in from Awesome Jake as well. Nika doing much the same on the back line of the fight for himself. Cuvo Fred has completed the kill onto the Bolts mid laner, being chased down though by Barracuda, who is able to answer back. Haddix is the next to fall. Neoma trying to slow down the priority targets. The Oni Warriors have already found 2. They've lost 1 though. Barracuda could go big on the other end of this fight. Airstrike up and over means disengage. The Oni Warriors get the Fury and at least a 1-kill advantage.
Yeah, that's, again, just another big win for them. I mean, and where if you're the Bolts, going to find anything back? Barra, at this point with Lasbra, might be able to kill off Dardes if they can catch him out, but might be able to pull with a full Devo's Gauntlets and crit a Pyromancer and do something big over here to keep some in their favor. But there's not a lot of opportunities for the Bolts to fight back right there. I think in the 5-on-5, we're starting to see where some things are severely lacking. And I want to talk about Kraken here, and more, not just because the Warriors have done a great job of avoiding it, but really just the lack of damage that it does if you essentially aren't hitting the center of it. And Vin, the times I've seen it connect, it's been on the very fringe of where it could land, plus it's only landed, I think, that time on the Cuvo.
Whoa.
It just feels like it's not getting anywhere near as much as it could, and unfortunately, that's just the way Poseidon kind of rolls.
Oni Warriors, they expand their gold lead out a little bit, and are now feeling more confident in pulling the Fire Giant. Silence out onto Awesome Jake. This might be one dead Atlas if Nika is able to find the back line. Awesome Jake runs away. TKO'd though. Cuvo Fred initiates onto Lasbra. Palau is up, but Fire Giant is low. We'll catch up with the 1v1 between the junglers in a second because the Fire Giant gets confirmed by the Oni Warriors. Kraken was there, and it's the last bit of damage to take out Neoma, but Cuvo Fred is back to finish business. Double kill on the Robin, and now it's FG +2 for the Oni Warriors. Haddix left running beneath the tier 1 tower. You need Vote to kill off this Cthulhu, but some lockdown from Nika, from Cuvo Fred, from Dardes will go a long way. There's the root in place, and Haddix will fall to Dardes.
The Warriors are just playing this game better. I think there's a little bit of it that has to... Better than game one? I just think better than the Bolts are playing right now. Like, the way that they're approaching these team fights, I think there's a little bit of it that has to do with the draft. I think that their draft is a little more superior. You've got better secure. You've got better control coming down from the Ymir than what the Atlas is bringing. I think that Barra has been doing a fantastic job so far. Top of the player damage charts. 1-0-1 has been able to provide a lot for the team, but it hadn't made that big of a difference. Meanwhile, you jump dramatically down to the bottom, below where Jake is, barely above where you see Neil. You've got Lasbra damage, you've got Vin damage, so like these two haven't been able to impact the game the way that you would want. They haven't been able to contribute to the team the way that I think this draft is meant to. And I'm not sure how much of it is partially like execution fault, and part of it is God fault, right? Like you dodged, locked in first pick. And so that's something that I think gave the Warriors a lot of time to think about. How do we want to adapt to that? And what can we pick to make that, and mitigate the impact that can have? Same thing, Poseidon. I'll just say it, like, it just has not looked great here. Like, I mean,
No.
it has been very lackluster. Every Kraken has been laughable at best, and not just because of, like, not placement-wise, just the damage. Doesn't mean anything. Nothing's happened out of it, and you're starting to see enough level leads. At least in mid, there's two. There's one or two in solo, one in jungle. It's enough that the Warriors, I think, at this point, just have control of the game. I think there was maybe a moment 5 or 6 minutes ago where the Bolts felt even despite the deficit. But especially now that they've got 4 Fire Giants, I don't think the Warriors have too much to worry about.
Cuvo Fred has so much burst damage, and you look at the difference between some of the damage between Cuvo Fred and Lasbra, about 5,000 or so, almost exactly 5,000. Lasbra only above Neilma on the damage charts, Venenu just above them, where Awesome Jake on Atlas has done more damage than those two. Just haven't been able to find the impact.
Yeah.
And Lasbra has fallen behind this 1v1 in the jungle a little bit. Might see the burst damage from Cuvo Fred here again in just a second. Lasbra goes in, overhead kick. Strong from Cuvo Fred. And immunes out a good bit of the damage that Lasbra was attempting to do. I mean, Lasbra's got good items. Just hasn't been able to find that back line. The Palaus haven't burned many beads, Gore. It's just been difficult for the initiators of the Olympus Bolts. Because what a dream, you know, Palau into Kraken sounds like. In theory, doesn't that just sound awesome? You get a couple pulls, Kraken
Yeah.
right beneath them.
In theory is the key word.
In theory is the key word there. As Lasbra and Cuvo Fred will brawl out a bit over in mid, but Lasbra's going to need some help in that matchup.
And honestly, I think that most of the Bolts are going to need help, right? I think that Haddix can really disrupt this, and I think their defense is going to be good. You have to walk into a very narrow path. Whirlpool, Kraken, as well as just Bera are going to be able to throw out a lot.
It's got to be on Barracuda. Keep your eyes on the bottom left of this screen. Can Barracuda position himself in a spot to deal enough damage? Circle of Protection is going to be great for the Oni Warriors. Health bars were once low, but no longer. As the healing rolls through from the Oni Warriors, and so does the reinitiation, but a nice knock-up on the other side. That one's from Awesome Jake.
Kill.
Barracuda's found the opening thread. Now Boat dashes onto the wall. He dashes out. Lasbra's found a good time to get effective, but Barracuda has dashed forward, has to airstrike on the other side of the wall, and the Bolts do it again. They find an opening, and they push back the Oni Warriors, and they keep their Phoenix alive.
Big downsides on this one, and it's just the fact that there's still 3 alive, although with Fire Giant timings, this might work out even more for him. The fight's still going.
Dartes gets pulled into the back, and look at Barracuda, the Jingwei walking forward. Dartes will die to Haddix. Barracuda looking for the last auto attack onto Cuvo Fred. Down the left lane goes the Jingwei. Lasbra starting to hit the gas pedal just a bit. Cuvo Fred will not die. It's all but a deicide to the Olympus Bolts under the left Phoenix.
They get a Fire Giant, though. I mean, look at this. Look at Vin's cooldowns. Look where his ult is, already halfway there. Fire Giant's going to be 20 seconds away. You've got time for the FG to spawn. Dartes won't even be back on the map by then, so you don't have to worry about Circle of Protection. Do still have to worry about Cuvo. Not getting that kill means it's a little less of a stagger, and there will still be...
Do you still go right there? I mean, Boat's respawning.
I mean, you defend...
Do you just rush to it?
You defend the Phoenix, you keep yourselves in a good position.
I mean, you're surely going to lose
I think you just rush to it. I think you've got beads, you've got Aegis, ults are down, but Vin just got theirs back up. This is the golden window of opportunity. Take it now.
Should be. Dartes, Circle of Protection, notably, now out of this fight. Have to imagine the Bolts favor themselves in a 5v4. 10 or 15 seconds of travel time for Dartes. As the Bolts do pull the Fire Giant. It is low. Then... will not drop his Kraken, and it is a clean FG for the Olympus Bolts. And the Phoenix defense from the Bolts pushes the Oni Warriors right back, and now this game is flipped. The Olympus Bolts again down in gold, but ahead on the FG counter.
It could not have been better timing for damn near every single person on the Bolts. Not only were the kills perfectly timed so that it staggered out the Warriors enough that they could get that FG, but the way that that fight ended up being approached, and again, it's just the layout of the map, kind of working in their favor to an extent that maybe I didn't expect it to fully work out the way they wanted it to. Haddix is able to get some really good CC, really good knockups. The Kraken didn't provide crazy much at the beginning, but that Circle of Protection had to get popped early in the fight, and then once that was burned through, it became a lot easier for Bera to step forward. We've seen what these crits can do, and it's already been hitting incredibly hard, so the damage that Bera had skyrockets through. I think Vin gets a lot more done in that fight than what we've gotten to see out of this, but they open up a huge window for Lasbra to jump forward and for Lasbra's Daji to finally get something done. I mean, it was sitting at, what, 3,000 damage just a second ago, jumps up 5K.
Ven does as well.
Ven goes up to 10K damage, so I think it was like 6,000 or 7,000 damage being done in that fight. And so I think Bara is really like the big name in lights just because of how much this Jingwei provided. Same thing for Haddix because Cthulhu. But I do think that their damage numbers and what they contributed that fight was night and day from what we got to see early on. And now with this FG, it's maybe not looking like easy Phoenix territory, but you should be able to put a lot of pressure onto the Warriors and fight this like you have a lead.
Man, how crazy just one fight makes. What a difference for the Olympus Bolts now. And it is almost a spitting image of game one. How we got here is a little different. But gold in favor of the Oni Warriors, but it's the Bolts with the FG and the Oni Warriors defending their left side Phoenix. This is exactly how game one ended. Could be exactly how game two ends, but you have to find an initiation, and Haddix has tried to find just that. Nika's initiation has been repelled by a pull from Awesome Jake, but Lasbra goes into the back and finishes off the kill. Is Palau enough? No, but Detonate from Neoma is. 1-for-1 trade so far. Nika for Lasbra. Cubo Fred goes back into the fight, and the wall enough to slow down the Olympus Bolts, but that is it. Left side Phoenix falls, and the Bolts will back off.
Bolts still have a little bit of work to do on the map. I think that there's a world where maybe if you can kill off like 3 more Warriors, you can feel comfortable going under the Titan. But with 3 towers still standing, that tier 1 in mid is still up for the Warriors right now. So you need a little bit more work, I think, just done on field for the Bolts to turn the map state even more in their favor. But getting that Phoenix after repelling the Warriors, so now they have fire minions on the best side of the map to have them, and they still have about a minute to play with this FG. I don't think this is going to be the most impactful minute of gameplay we've ever seen from a power play, but I do think that it should be able to contribute at least a little bit in terms of how much they're going to set up. Pyromancer's available, so that should be an easy swing in their favor. That'll make the game about even when it comes down to gold conversations. But I also think that they could very easily walk over, peek over, knock down that tier 1 in mid if they so choose. And it's just how much you want to slow roll this. You've got a minute and a half with 30 seconds of that being an FGE enabled.
Right.
It might just be pyro back, reset, come back with some more wards after you get vision down on the map, and just make sure that you're full health. If you have an item that you can get or if need to finish a la Bara, maybe this is going to be the push that gets you that last little bit of gold.
It's actually, depending on what the Olympus Bolts are able to get done here,
They might get the tier 2.
gonna be about dead even going into this next Fire Giant fight. If you're the Bolts, you would have loved for that Phoenix Siege to have just ended the game, because now the Oni Warriors still have a thread back into the rest of this game where the Olympus Bolts, of course, have the clear opportunity to end. Left side Phoenix down, Fire Minions pushing. It's a clinical way of ending games that SPL teams have followed. The Oni Warriors not far enough behind, actually
Not at all.
nearly even, to where you have to look at just maybe one more fight. I think Vote comes up big here in moments like this, having the ultimate on the Chernobog to rotate into a fight. He can clear out some waves on the left side of the map should he choose, and then ult into the rest. Cubo Fred the one clearing out waves now. Has to be careful though, because the Olympus Bolts have made their way left. Oracles will spot out Ven and Bara, and the Primal Fury will make it plenty obvious. But did Cubo Fred think that everyone was on the Fury? Maybe he did. Lasbra rooted in place. Body block's not enough. Mystic Rush, though, forced out. The Olympus Bolts get themselves a Fury and an ultimate from the Oni Warriors jungler.
I think they might have been, I want to say, a teensy bit happier if Beads had gone down. But an ult down's not going to feel bad at all. In Venom Deathbringer, as well as Obshard just now, finished for Bara and Vin respectively. So huge power spikes I think you're getting out of the carries. All of a sudden, the Bolts go from, okay, hey, I haven't gotten enough damage out of at least one of the 2 carries to, oh, they're going to hit hard. And they're going to hit hard very well. Dardas is alive this time, though, so it's going to be a little more difficult. Jake might get caught out, but look, the carries, they're just going for the FG buff while the others are zoning.
This is a split fight from the Olympus Bolts. Nika doing just fine. A 2v1 for Nika against the backline, and Nika has run over Venenu. Barracuda had to back away. Awesome Jake will be the second to go down. The Oni Warriors are now rolling the Olympus Bolts. Dardes, though, taken low. Lasbra will at least finish off the kill, but Haddix and Barracuda are the last 2 alive. A double kill from Vote, brought to you by Nika. Might have just ended this game, and a wall from Neoma might seal it.
Yeah, Haddix is just playing distraction. This is buy time and do what you can. I hope that someone will respawn faster. Unfortunately, you can't buy your way back here. So it is Bera. Again, a lot of crit, a lot of damage, a lot of potential. There's only so much you can do, and what is he going for? I think he might be looking into the back line. Yeah, no, you have to back here.
hoping to find one.
I'd hope to defend under the Titan.
15 on Ven, 18 on Jake. Can Barracuda buy 10 seconds? Can he do
God,
more?
yeah, he
Oh,
can.
yes,
Oh
he
my
can. Oh my God! All right, the game's not over. We go on. We fight on. I thought the Oni Warriors might have just ended the game, but Barracuda, the deletes
Barracuda, all right, I need to buy 10? Cool.
And you know what? I'm sad I didn't get this out prior to going into that fight. Unless Neoma is itemized differently in the last couple of seconds. And I really, well, for my sake, I'm about to make a different point, so I hope Barracuda isn't doing anything else because it'll be totally undercut by
He might catch out Cuvo.
by what I'm talking about. Pings
He walked,
are down.
I think he just walked over a ward.
Yeah, I think, all right, this one's sealed.
Yeah, he did.
Neoma's dead for 20 seconds, and now we are flipped again where the Olympus Bolts have a 5v4 around the Fire Giant because of one kill that Barracuda found in a 1 versus 3. Fire Giant is absolutely destroyed by the Olympus Bolts. And Gore, I do want to point out, and this might end up changing, a lack of anti-crit for the Oni Warriors. 0 Spectrals, that now changes because Neoma has finished that item. Barracuda has freely swung away with these crits in these last couple of fights. I thought the Oni Warriors were going to win after their FG fight win. It didn't, though. Barracuda turns back a kill. I don't know if that kill saves the game, but does give him a free FG in a minute.
I think it does, right? I think
You
Vin,
think they still go?
because I think if you, well, I don't know, because the Phoenix was also burned slow. And so it was that weird moment of like, if you get that Phoenix a little faster, if you're under the Titan room, Bera still gets that kill in just that scenario. But if Bera doesn't back, or if Bera doesn't have the capability to burn Neil down, you still have a lot of potential to walk into the Titan room. Vin's there, but he respawned like just after, like 3 or 4 seconds right after the Phoenix goes down. And so there's a window of opportunity. It almost actually it makes me think that the Warriors, and you know, again, hindsight 2020, right? The right play there would have been, let's go get the FG. Unfortunately for them, that's not what happened, and that's not the world we live in. It did feel like it was close to an end. And I think that Bera, if not saves it, then saves it a little earlier than we would have seen a save, right? It might have been, okay, Titans at half health and Vin and Bera get a save, as opposed to just Bera bouncing them back. But now they've got the EFG. They've got really good siege, as we saw last time. I think if Haddock, with Blink available, just decides to go deep, they're going to be able to create an easy conversation for a win.
How the jungle 1v1 has changed, too. Suddenly, Lasbra started to do a lot more, at least feel a lot more comfortable in some of the 1v1s. Cuvo Fred has Bloodforge. So look for this Robin to roll, or is Cuvo Fred going to be under threat? Walks away, but look at the Oni Warriors on the left. Kraken knocks up Neoma. Barracuda is full HP. Can't say the same for the Phoenix, though. Can say the same for Ven, who's finalized the kill onto Neoma. Now a pull onto Nika will not connect. The Olympus Bolts have gotten a kill onto Neo. They've gotten the left side Phoenix, and they still have enhanced FG for 1 minute and 45.
So what was it, like 15, almost 20 minutes ago in the game where I said that like Lasbra and Vin just weren't giving me what I wanted out of these picks? They took that personally, dude. Like, I don't know what it was. I don't think they can hear us, but it hit them to the core. And since that moment, they have been playing the way that I expected and the way I wanted them to from the get-go. I mean, you have to think about it. 20 minutes ago, this was a Warriors game almost through and through.
Vote deserves a shout-out, though, as well. If the Warriors are going to turn this game around, it might need to be Vote. It might need to be Cuvo Fred, though, who was killed off Ven first. Barracuda dashes forward, has some crits for Cuvo. Lasbra's got some damage for Dardes, and the mid lane Phoenix will be the next target for the Olympus Bolts. Now it is just Nika and Vote, but there is too much damage onto the Titan. The Olympus Bolts have turned around the game yet again. Barracuda ends this one on a rampage, and the Bolts go up 2.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of conversation to be had. Bera plays just out of his damn mind throughout that game, man. So I think all of the praise, heaps of it, thrown over towards the carry, but I think you have to give a lot of attention there. Really good pulls in the last couple of fights that come down from Jake. That is impressive from the Atlas. The Cthulhu, massive impact in terms of team fights. The engage that Haddock's brought to the table was incredible. But I think if you go back, and if we get the same first like 15, 20 minutes out of Lasbra in Venenu that we got in the last, or we have that copy-pasted over.
Right.
That game ends 22 minutes in with a Warriors victory. I think they turn around whatever it was, whether it's power spikes, which admittedly was like right after Arata Tahuti and a couple of items scooped up for him, but also that left side Phoenix defense against a Fire Giant or Oni Warriors. That's where a Kraken goes big. That's when a powwow comes through. That's when we get to see a surge from those two. I think that moment was a very defining light for the Bolts and really helped elevate them to where they needed to be.
If the Oni Warriors have a lead at all in Game 3, I'm just assuming that the Olympus Bolts are going to win it. 2-0 up go the Olympus Bolts on the verge of a 3-0 win. We'll see if they can complete it. Coming up next.
Wave. Me on the beat too. Look, yeah. Okay. I pull up you deep on my niggas, consider it's pivotal. Trap through the app, make her clap it, though cap it, she tapping it fast. I think that you know they be catching it. Standing 6 feet up, casting a shadow. What niggas they talk like they bad, they know that we got it. They talk far from actual. I make the wave, so tsunami, I dare you to paddling. The trunk steady rattling. Blowing top tier to keep my thoughts clear. I see the opt in there, I'm on my shot, call it big boss. That never know the time, I'm never clocking in. Wildflower, I'm like Denzel, I've been the man on fire. I'm hot lava, you are not scarred, you are proudly. I'm a real to the coffin seal. Heart chill from all this talking real. Recent life feel like a highlight reel. Currently thumbing through currency, I'm from the avenue, bitch, I'ma get it regardless. I told little baby to slide with that lotus, pull up with the garden. My guard is down till you come around, trying to hold you some. Give a how you feel, I don't owe you nothing. Now you trying to make amends, I'm just trying to get the fortunes. Trying to cut my mama fortress. Pop might pull up in a Porsche. I used to be quiet, was timid. They used to catch me skipping courses. Now they snapping portrait. Hard head, but never forced it. I got a pin it shine like it's supposed to. The way I deliver, they pros to. My neck got a compass to know where we going. It sound like I'm stepping through portals. I'm off of that poison, the devil be calling, but I just ignore it, hit for it. The task force told me go up. Okay, yeah, you asked for it. Wave. The task force told me go up. Okay, yeah, you asked for it. Wave. The task force told me go up. Look. The way that I ball, I should've played for the Big Ten when I touch stage, but they packed in. Got a pretty thing to make a back bend. Let me see it all through the glass lens. Had some people try to snake if I see you. I'm teed up, I greet you with brass hands. Skate off fast, put a buck on the dash to somewhere vast. With my feet up, wait, hold up the label, just call me the tapping. They just cut the check, so I'm up in the slip. I take for J to the neck, then I stretch. To start my day, I hit the cash dance. It's different now, I was down then, but that's all in the past tense. So I can't stop till I'm top 10, and I'm not 10. I'm so in love with the process. Not all in the day, but it took them some time to build Rome. I just copped the crib, never home. No, I can't keep a charge on the phone. So she thinks she in love with a ghost. When I'm home, I make sure that she get what she needs, so she know what I'm capable of. Know my rhythm can spar with the pros. They pay me to hear what I'm on, they ask what I'm on. I'm doing great, I suppose. Cause I get to do what I want, it's legit, but it sound like it's straight from the stove. They playing my tape in the field and they treat me like I'm making plays in the fort. Know the beat bang with a force. I'm a product to stay in the course, yeah. I watch my step on a tightrope. The rate going up at a high slope. I don't got no work-life balance. I'm never throwing a towel in. The pen game hella nice with it. The flow heavy like a hydrant. But it come with a patent, I'm laughing at badgering. All of them boys, they won't bite it. I keep my center and shine like I'm supposed to. The way I deliver, they posed to. I'm going somewhere you ain't seen on no atlas. It look like we stepping through portals. I'm off of the potion, the devil been calling, but I just ignored it for it. Task force told me go up. Okay, you asked for it. Let's go way up, so high, so high, so high. The task force told me go up. So higher, I'm so higher, I'm so higher. Way up in the sky, way up in the sky, way up in the sky.
Hold up, wait a second. I need to know your title. Turn around, I need a minute. Are you anybody's wife yet? Keep holding my breath since the day you left. Can't get no rest. No. Deleted all your photos, but they're still burning inside my mind. Threw away all your clothes, cause I didn't want anything left to remind me of us. Keep holding my breath since the day you left. Can't get no rest. No. watch every move that you're making. You're stuck on my brain, I'm going insane, crying the rain. No, no.
I gotta tell you, Mifflin, I'm getting the craziest sense of whiplash during these games here because one team will have a massive lead. It's a good one. One team will have a massive lead, and then they'll lose a team fight, and the other team will now have a lead. And then that team will lose a team fight, and it keeps going back and forth. This constant ping-pong match here in Game 2 still continues. The Olympus Bolts, for the first, 15 minutes of the game, felt like it was going to be over for them. It felt like the Warriors were just going to punch their ticket, clock in, and get ready for game number 3. But now we're in this moment now where the Oni Warriors are the ones who have to worry about, can they find a win to get beyond Game 3 at this point?
Yeah, that was as back and forth as it gets, man. One team's on the precipice of knocking on the door of the Titan, immediately returned onto the other end, Phoenix Siege after Phoenix Siege, but gets the end of the game eventually in favor of the Olympus Bolts. But I think in a game as close-fought, as close-knit as this one was, you can't really lay much on the feet of drafts. You can't really lay much on the feet of strategy. It's more so play on field that separates these two teams this time around. And the Olympus Bolts came to play a little bit more so. That said, I think the Oni Warriors, with the lead that they were able to establish throughout the early, should have been able to transition their play into objectives a little bit more consistently, especially with Dardes on this E set. But the Olympus Bolts were able to mitigate that success throughout the early portions and make sure by the time we got to that 25, 30 or so minute mark that the lead was not so substantial in favor of the Oni Warriors, that the Olympus Bolts were capable of utilizing their composition that was very strong in the team fight. You've got great CC, beads burning tools between Awesome Jake and Lasbra. Haddix was just an apex predator in the back line, and eventually, after many trials and many errors, the Oni Warriors fall down.
Barracuda maybe saving the game for his team there at the very end when the Warriors are knocking down the mid-Phoenix. I hear, Dave was going, he needs 15 seconds. Can he buy 10 seconds? And then it was crit, 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 Neil is dead. Okay, yeah, I think he's bought enough time.
But you got to take into account how the Oni Warriors had approached that siege. They did not want to end there. If they wanted to end, Nika stays. Nika would have gone in with the push as well. I think that was a scenario in which the Oni Warriors were trying to say, hey, we're going to take the mid-Phoenix, we're going to disengage. So even in losing their support, even in losing Neilma, that's acceptable losses, the Oni Warriors. That was a decision actively from the Warriors that this is not an opportunity to end, and even when Barracuda knocks him down, it was only 8 seconds left on Ven's respawn.
That's fair. It was getting down to the wire there, and you're probably right to say with Nika not there, maybe not looking to end that one out there, but the Oni Warriors do need to look to end at least a game in their favor here. Picks and Vans for game number 3. And potentially the Oni Warriors' final chance to bring this one back to take us into game number 4. The way these games have been going, man, I have no idea where any of these games are going to go. Are the Bolts going to get another win? Are the Oni Warriors going to get another win? All that just comes down to how they play on field here. First ban, though, will be the Morgan. The Bolts very concerned of what Dardes is able to do with that pick.
And the Oni Warriors, maybe more specifically Neilma, no stranger to this situation. I wonder if there's any players who've got as much experience as Neilma in a reverse sweep scenario. I mean, I had the opportunity walking past him. He walks out and he says, you know what? I got him exactly where I want him. So, Oni Warriors fans, hold your banners high, put your arms in the air, give them some energy because they're going to need it. It's a steep hill to climb up against the Olympus Bolts, but one that I think the Oni Warriors are capable of. I would be legitimately surprised if this set ends in 3. The Olympus Bolts, obviously, a very dominant team and now at match point in a very good position. But the Oni Warriors, there's something about them. They always take these sets the distance.
And we'll have Morgan and Ardeo banned away by the Bolts, Zeus, and Kleena on the opposite side here for the Warriors. Last game in this spot, the Bolts banned Yamoja, not wanting to play it, not wanting to play against it. We'll see if that ends up being the same third ban for them here. But I think you're right to talk about how when a game gets that late, when you start getting to these 35, 40 minutes, it really wasn't the draft difference out there. It really was a lot of how the actual play on field and the team fights ended up going there. And one thing I noticed consistently in a lot of these fights was that Barracuda was just kind of left to free cast. If I'm not mistaken, he went undying in game number 2, put out a crazy amount of damage onto this Jing Wei. So if you're the Warriors, I mean, do you start putting some stock into making sure to shut down Barra early, try to find him in those backlines and fights.
It's hard to say, right? Start looking at Barracuda, all of a sudden Ven's popping off. Start looking at Ven, Barracuda's doing it to you. So maybe the Oni Warriors could look towards some more consistent bursts so they can, once they do close gap into that backline, which is not an easy task with Haddix playing as he was in the last match. That Cthulhu made it very difficult for anybody on the Oni Warriors to get into position to look at these priority targets. But once they did get back there, very often Barracuda on this incredibly safe pick, Jing Wei, was able to survive the majority of those team fights. So I think it was an active decision from the Oni Warriors to say, hey, we can't really look at Barracuda because when you do, my man just airstrikes over a wall, and who's chasing that? Just about nobody, especially with a Descended into Madness Cthulhu right on your heels.
Well, it will be a Dodgy and then a Nox to round out the top 6 bans across the board. And that leaves the Umoja open, so the Bolts will be able to grab that one for themselves. And now the Oni Warriors have their response. Ymir has been the pick for Neil Ma a couple of times to answer up against this. Has had some very nice highlight plays on that God, even up against another Umoja. That one up against the Titans at the very end of the first phase here. But the Warriors have a lot open here. I mean, they can grab their jungler, they can grab their mid, grab their support, whatever they want to do so here. They'll start with ESET to leave a little bit of flexibility open. But like we said, going into game number 2, this is a pick that Dardes specifically really likes to play.
Yeah, and it really is all about that objective-focused play. We saw it exemplified perfectly in the first set of the day. Paul flubs a couple confirms with the circle protection, and all of a sudden this composition falls apart because you don't transition yourself into the late game with enough of a lead. I think the Oni Warriors, not in flubbing confirmation, but maybe in lack of pressure around objectives, find themselves in a very similar situation. So in going back towards the E set, the Oni Warriors, to me, this reads very loudly to me, that they are trying to play around Gold Furies. They want to go to Pyromancers. That is exactly the name of the game for them. And now they want to build a draft that can make use of that in the late game when they have that lead. So keep your eyes on the objectives. Keep your eyes on the neutrals. The Oni Warriors likely will be trying to keep their pressure up there. Capri locked in yet again for Neil Ma, a pick that he has been allowed to play very, very often, and he plays it at the highest level. Will give you a little bit more so of a safety net and limit the Bolt's ability to go for a single target style of picks. You don't want to lock in a double hunter composition against Capri. You don't want to lock in a whole lot of single target DPS because Capri is the best at stopping it.
I mean, game 1 and 2, the Oni Warriors had been drafting Chernobog in that top 2 spots. So making that quick adaptation here in game number 3 to now draft their Guardian, their support here for Neil Ma. That leaves a lot open here for the Bolts. I mean, Barracuda can just go back to Jing Wei again, continue to extend that 100-plus game count that he has on this God, and then even throw in a Shiva into the mix here. The Olympus Bolts pick up what could be their jungler here on the side for Lasbra. And how you kind of feel about the Shiva, kind of partnering up with this Umoja?
Well, it's a lot of healing, so you might have to contend yourself with something like an Ankh in the late phase of the game, but Neil Ma has gone on record in saying that he doesn't really value Ankh as highly. Instead, really would prefer to go towards things like Belt of the Berserker, because of the versatility that allows you not only to use it in a team fight, but also to burn through some objectives, and objective burn and confirmation still the name of the game just by nature of that first selection for the Oni Warriors. Shiva, though, to me, is just, hey, I want to win out in the early. I need to get my ball rolling before level 10. I want to be blinking in at level 2. That's why when we saw the Titans taking this pick, it was constant back camp invades. It was constant dives in the mid tower. Shiva falls off incredibly hard. This is one of the quickest fall-offs you'll see in power at around level 15. Up until then, though, Shiva incredibly strong. So the Bolts put a slight timer on their jungler.
We do see a Muzen Cobb picked up. Now, most often, this God has been making its way over towards the mid lane, and we can see that even the Oni Warriors are possibly thinking that that one is going over to Ven and Olarun as the next ban out here. And then Rom picked up for the Oni Warriors, so giving Vote something maybe a little safe, something that you can get some long-distance snipe damage off with that ultimate. But with that Muzen Cobb, he's going to need a little bit of extra help around him for some safety. There's where the Shiva and the Umoja come in. The Olympus Bolts recognizing no jungle picked up just yet. Will continue to throw more shots over at Cuvo Fred. Last time around, they banned the Shiva and the Nemesis. This time they pick the Shiva, and then they take the Nemesis away.
So there's some inherent synergy now in the Oni Warriors draft in that both ESET and Rom are very adept at extending their lives in very poor circumstances. ESET does it for herself by dropping a circle protection on her feet, getting that additional damage mitigation, getting a large burst of healing, which buys time for the rest of your team to rotate in and help you out. The same can be said of Rom by going up into the air. Sure, it's a good deal of damage, but more so and more often in the early phase of the game, Rom ultimate is just an extended Aegis. Land down, actually use your Aegis, and you've bought 5, 6, 7 seconds for somebody to rotate in and help you. Who's rotating in to help these two targets? It's a Khepri. So both Iset and Rom should be relatively safe in the early phases and have enough tools in their own kits to buy time to allow Neoma to rotate through and use that circle protection. I love the top 3 from the Oni Warriors.
To add to the top 3, it's now a Raven to go back in towards the jungle. Cuvo Fred had a decent game on it last time around. How did you feel about the Raven in game number 2, and how do you feel with it kind of grouping up here with the 3 the Oni Warriors have drafted?
Raven didn't overly impress, or it was more so a middling performance, I think. Has great ability to survive some of the strongest assets of the Bolts draft, things like Stinger from a Muzen Cobb, overhead kick, the CC from Yamoja, Riptide. Generally, we see these assassins or these junglers have to pop their beads, then dash through a Riptide. You could just overhead kick through that as well. So decent counter matchups, decent small interactions that will favor the Raven going forward. Also has just a phenomenal matchup up against the Poseidon. You're not getting Kraken as Raven. That's simply the case. You've got 2 ways to deal with that, and that's not even taking relics into account. So I think Raven fits the draft very well and also leans a little bit more so towards that early game pressure that the Oni Warriors will likely try and throw around, again, around these neutral objectives. Keep your eyes on this E-set. Every single time E-set is locked in, and it's not in support, it's all about going towards these golds.
And right after that Raven, it's a Horus lock-in to go over towards that solo lane for Haddix once again. And then that Poseidon, as you mentioned. So does Muzen Cobb now, pivoting over towards the dual lane here for Barracuda, as he had a couple of target bans thrown towards him with that Olrun Jing Wei. And then a Gilgamesh to round things out. They were hovering the Odin there. And it, to me, would have made a lot of sense. You got Poseidon, AMC, Shiva, Yamoja, can't get out of that cage. But why do you think the change over to the Gilgamesh in this case?
Team fight presence, the ability to disrupt some of these less mobile gods. Muzen Cobb just gets dominated by Gilgamesh, and we saw it during the World Championship. Cyclone Spin just became just what was a non-factor. Every single Panatom, or every single time Panatom, Panatom maybe is something he should start to look towards.
Yo, it's Panatom right now.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. So you're welcome, Panatom. But Gilgamesh, every single time he is able to make contact with Muzen Cobb, there's not much Muzen Cobb can do about it. So great counter matchup there. Very immobile hunter. Should make it a little bit easier for the Oni Warriors to figure out who it is exactly that they want to dive in these team fights. That said, I have gone on record in saying that I think Gilgamesh just fits the jungle role a lot better. I feel the exact same way about Raven. I'd prefer both of those gods in the jungle, which means one of them does have to go solo. The Odin Hover makes me think this is Gilgamesh slated for solo, so you have to evaluate the lane matchup up against Horus. And it's not one that you get to see very often, Gilgamesh up against Horus.
No.
I think it's going to be more so about the rotation. You're not really getting a whole lot of 1v1 potential in that lane.
No, definitely not. Now, what if they are trying to flip the script on us? You know, it was the Odin Hover, so you could assume that the Gilgamesh going over to solo. If this Raven does manage to be a solo pickup, how do you kind of feel about him over there compared to over in the jungle?
Raven in solo, depending on the style of build, has the potential to go towards things like the Soul Eater for additional sustain, already matched up with the sustain that he has built into the kit. Synergizes well with the Bruiser style of build because of the damage immunity that you gain, or damage mitigation rather, from the ultimate. So Raven solo, I think, might be slightly better than Gilgamesh solo. You also are able to connect with the entire wave more consistently. I don't like either of them in the solo lane, though, and I'm going to be vocal about that. If I had to choose one, though, looking at the drafts, it's more so, the decision-making process is more so, who do I want involved in the team fight earlier? And I always want that Gilgamesh involved, so I would prefer to see him in the jungle.
Well, we'll have to see as we jump into the potentially the final game here. Game number 3 between these two teams. Will that Raven go into the jungle once again for Cuvo? Will we see the flip-up? And maybe see Nika take yet another assassin over into the solo lane? It wouldn't be uncommon, knowing these teams and knowing this league. Will it be a 3-0 shutout by the Bolts, or can the Warriors take us to game number 4? Let's jump right into game 3 to find out.
Gonna need to be a reverse sweep now for the Oni Warriors. Something that Neoma teams not unused to, but it's gonna be 3 straight games against a Bolts team that has won despite being in goal deficits throughout large portions of the parts and portions, whatever you want to take out of that. Partitions maybe even, of the early to mid game of both of the last 2 games. And the Oni Warriors, Gore, stick with a similar mindset here. They stick with the Robin, which had some good looks. Dardes on the E set, which always looks a baseline level of good. And then throw something new out there. Give Nika the Gilg solo, vote on Ram ADC, and Neilma some safety in the Khepri support.
It is definitely a shift up, though, right? Gilg solo, not something we haven't seen, not something that maybe is typically where we see him the most. And based on what Mifflin had said on the desk, right, maybe would have preferred it in the jungle only because, well, let me rephrase that. There's a Raven on the team, so yeah. I think most people would probably prefer to just glance over Gilgamesh entirely and go for something else. But if it was going to be picked up, sans Raven, probably in the jungle just because of how much impact it could have against the Amuz and Cobb really early on, maybe getting a little more, I guess just hands-on in the dual lane, right? Like go over there, look for more or early game ganks, and make things flow a little bit better for the Warriors. That being said, Dave, and you said this last time, and I think it's worth mentioning again here, I don't know if I want an early game lead from the Warriors.
Yeah, right.
That has been going too well the last couple of games. And I think the same thing could be said, especially for this solo lane, where Nika has had an easy lead over Haddix pretty much every single time. And each time it hasn't mattered because Haddix isn't playing these gods. It's the Horus twice and the Cthulhu once. He's not playing gods that need the lead to come in. He's not going for disruption. He's playing something that is very team-based, very team-oriented. And so all of a sudden it becomes a different type of fight. It's not, cool, I'm, as Nika, as Kukulkan, as Gilgamesh, I'm coming in for disruption. As Haddix, I'm coming in for heals, for stuns, for setup. And it was pretty much the same thing last time.
Early initiation, something we haven't seen in games 1 or 2. This time, though, results the same, with not much on the other end. It is a stylistic shift up from Barracuda. That said, this game, Gore, remember, it goes big towards the end of game 2. The Jingwei, such a strong pick later on. You get the crit online, shredding health bars. Now you've got AMC, a little more ability-based, a lot more immobile. Barracuda, of course, a tenured enough player to make that mental swap in his head. But the Oni Warriors now should, you imagine, have an easier time getting onto the Hunter.
And they spent a lot of time, go back game 1, the Artemis was pretty easy to sit on. Amuz and Cobb has significantly less than Artemis in terms of like self-peel. Honey slows people down. Your hives make you a little faster, and your damage really is the biggest self-peel. I'll kill you is usually the way that you turn that kind of thing around. It takes a little while to get there. And I think with the start that I'm seeing, looks like it actually might be a Transcendence early on for Barra, unless, he pivots to something else in the tree. We've seen a few Transcendences super early for a few gods. Yep. Ullr comes to my mind. But it does slow down your gameplay significantly. Granted, the Bolts have been playing for the 20 to 25 minute mark anyway. So I don't think it's something that's going to hurt their overarching play and their overarching plan. It just depends on how well, Vote and specifically Neil can capitalize on this. And if we see any of this Raven. Cuvo was kind of chilling for a long time in the last game before we saw a really active play.
Yeah, I do wonder. Although, but there wasn't much of a pacing change from game 1 to game 2. To your point, Gore. Maybe Cuvo, again, it's a pick that can get active early. I don't know how successful you'll be ganking Haddix outside of the first few levels. You're right, though. Maybe Barracuda this time offers an alternate option for Cuvo Fred, whereas it has only been Ven, who, for the 3rd time in a row, playing a somewhat immobile mage out of mid. Alternatively, it could just be a pick that maybe the Oni Warriors feel like counters a lot of the initiation and burst damage of the Olympus Bolts and has some scrap potential later on. Now, Lasbra has baited me a couple of times, at least in game 2 with some solo lane pressure. Ended up not ganking over towards solo lane, but Haddix seems to be doing just fine. I imagine it's Golden Blade early for Haddix, counter out some of the clear maybe potential that Nika has. It really seems like both junglers scored just fine with rotating around the map, farming things up, and putting themselves in a stronger spot towards the mid game. The Cuvo Fred, maybe with the first bit of little pressure early here. This will be a clean red buff attempt. Unfortunately, though, only gets the sides. Looks like Venenu is able to drop the red.
Yeah, stays an attempt, right? And I like where Cuvo's presence of mind is. I think that we've seen countless times so far the Warriors with good farm and good principle and approach to this early game has led them to significant leads where they've been able to potentially leverage it for more. Oh my God!
Well, 2 kills happen all at once. The one we saw was Second Blood. As over here, another kill gets dropped, and it's Dardes who still has his ultimate.
It was just a blink.
So,
it was just
yeah,
gone.
Looks like
He's just
an
dead.
initiation onto Haddix out of nowhere. Nika drops Winds of Shamash, though, so we get an idea of what happens over on the right side of the map. And that just a one rotation on Overgore. Dardes plus Nika equals kill onto Haddix.
I think it is a good spot. I think getting Dardes first blood feels good. Killing Jake here feels pretty good as well. I don't know, with the Riptide, if it's going to last. Also, worth mentioning, harkening back to game 1, Jake's Yamoja's Riptides specifically were really, really on point.
Yep.
And worked well against this exact Khepri. Now they're maybe going to get aggressive onto Cuvo. But I think getting first blood onto Dardes, thumbs up. Getting kills and lane pressure, I guess, for Nika is a technical thumbs up. But end of the day, I don't care if Haddix dies. Haddix could be down 3 levels from Nika for all I care. At this point, like level 7-10, that would make a big difference. But like a level 13 to 16 from what we've seen over the last couple of games, I'm not sure if I'm sweating it too much if I'm the Bolts. And so I think where the pressure is going for the Warriors, maybe not exactly in agreement with what I think they maybe should focus on. But I do think that any amount of lead, any kills, anything that you're going to be able to pick up is still a big deal for you. So positives that's still going their way. The question really is just going to come down to how well they can leverage, some of the early pressure that they have in just apparent in terms of God picks.
Yep.
Neil, where he's going to maybe potentially find Flux, what they can do with the circle protection, knowing that they have it online pretty early. I think there's a lot of options for the Warriors out there. Now, I'm curious to see how they end up playing it. Otherwise, the Bolts, I think this is the first time that we can say this after a few minutes of gameplay, have an early game lead. It's not a lot.
That means the only Warriors win now, right? Because whichever team has had the early lead ends up losing. So maybe fighting against history now are the Olympus Bolts. I think that the desk did set this up. Although the Oni Warriors did have like a 200 or 300 gold lead, according to our charts there, and now the Bolts are fighting back. So I don't know when you consider the lead to be important, but could make an argument for both teams. Just to sit on the fence a little bit here. A red buff invade by the Bolts. This one is successful. Sphere ball out onto Awesome Jake. Gotta be a kill, and it is for Cubo Fred. In the back, though, Neoma searching for a pluck. Won't grab it. Stinger goes out. Venenu held onto the Kraken. Might have gotten Neoma low, but there is a Scarab's Blessing as well around the corner. Now Ven, all on his own, drops the Kraken.
There it is.
Oh my God, but Vote turns around some damage. Dardes being chased through by Lasbro. One more tick of damage, and Lasbro's got it. Ends up being an effective trade for the Bolts, winning out by 1 or 2.
Yeah, 3 for 2, elongated version of that fight.
Yep.
But they get a red buff as well, so like a little bit of icing on the cake. That was a good Kraken, a very beautiful
and a purple
play,
buff.
I think, from Vin. Plus a purple buff, so yeah, a little bit more going in their favor. Maybe not the cleanest engage, but I do think you get kills and assists where they matter most. Vera jumps up by 3 assists, so that's going to be a nice little boost over there. Same thing, Vin being able to pick up what they do in that fight, big kind of bolstering for them. But the Shiva showcases not only the damage that you can get from the ultimate this early on, but a nice early game lead. 2-0-1. I want to see this pressure from Lasbro continue. I want to see fights like that get sought out. And I want to see Lasbro going for these setup plays, whether it's knockups, pulling in with the ring, ults, anything like that, I think are big deals.
Wow, lots of damage onto Ven. Shell doing its work. Oh, he broke his ankles. That's unbelievable. From Venenu, sends Cubo Fred one direction. Oh no, if he dies anyway, there's no justice in this world. Cubo Fred rounds the corner, gets the kill onto Ven anyway. Oni Warriors able to balance out the kills, now tied at 4, and grab themselves a red buff as well.
That's that good old European health coverage, right? Like, Vin broke his ankles, but Cubo was fine pretty quickly.
Yeah, he was fine
Didn't
anyway.
cost him too much either.
No.
And now Vera, he's going to be in a little bit of trouble. A lot of bit of trouble. Oh my God, the damage. That's just out of nowhere. And that's what this is why I was asking for. If you were wondering why for like 15 minutes or 13 minutes, I was lamenting that Cubo Fred wasn't getting involved. Granted, he didn't have a lot of good targets in game 2. But it's because look at what he can do with that damage. I mean, it is nuts how much this Robin can do when he gets hands-on early on. And I think that was just a perfect illustration of where he can put that pressure and where they can find it. I'm honestly surprised that they didn't continue trying to pull the Gold Fury, especially with the Circle of Protection. Maybe not feeling too confident in, like, just their survivability right now more than anything.
Awesome, Jake. Surely not. Yeah, Vote will roll away. The good news is for Bolts fans that there is a slight lead in solo, slight lead in mid, and slight lead in support. So the Oni Warriors still a bit down behind in gold after the Pyromancer goes to the Bolts. A small silver lining after the Oni Warriors were able to turn around a couple of picks. And you're right, Court, it seems like the first time in a couple of games we've really seen the immobile characters punished early on. Ben has been jumped on a couple times now. Barracuda once. That's given Cuvo Fred all the power in the world moving into the next stage of this game. A sliver of an item advantage for Cuvo if it ends up being Brawler's Beat Stick for Lasbra as well. Fully completed for Cuvo. Still sitting on the tier 2 item is Lasbra. Jake was behind Cuvo just a bit here. Vote low on health, low on mana, but Barracuda's been able to go back, come back to lane, has an item advantage, so should be winning the trade initially, but Vote will be able to go back, I think, buy up a full item here. Had over 2,000 gold, does. Full chin size on his way back into lane. So now the scales tilt back a bit, Gore. Where chin size feeling really good for Vote, and maybe a slight advantage for the Warriors there on left.
The small advantage really could be leveraged to a lot. I'm surprised that the Warriors, again, with the amount of control that they could have, haven't maybe opened up more conversations around left lane and specifically go over there, either hurt Barra and put him down or force the relics and make it a little more awkward of a fight. Maybe put a little bit of pressure onto Vin, pull a Kraken out while you can. Then you can open up an easy Fury from that point forward. I think the earliest we saw this phase, though, was like, 6:55, like right at that 7-minute mark, right? So it wasn't even like it was something absolutely insane in terms of potential.
Whoa, shell out from the Olympus Bolts. That's awesome, Jake. Nilma trying to steal away the Obelisk. There is a River's Rebuke up from awesome Jake on the other side of this fight. Both supports low. Nilma, the closest one to death, though. Venenu still has the Kraken, but I think infinitely more ultimate expenditure by the Olympus Bolts here. Only Kraken ready. Stinger, though, comes back. There's only Mystic Rush had to get used by the Warriors.
I think the biggest one, seeing Jake, I can't even visualize where we saw the River's Rebuke and Haddock's using theirs for rotationary power.
Over towards mid.
But yeah, like Lasbra just didn't hit anything with the ult, so that one maybe feels like the worst of them all. That gets expended, doesn't necessarily find anything. I like where the mind was at, though, trying to chase down Neil Ma, maybe just a little bit too far away. And Neil with a dash is able to displace just enough to make sure that it's not going to connect. But that is another interesting point as the Riptides are just bullying Neil. But really, I think the biggest thing is seeing where Lasbra's healing is going to come into the equation later on. You've got Haddock's healing later on, Jake healing now and later on. And so I do think that the Bolts, at least in terms of survivability, will start pushing the fringe of the Warriors. And you've already got a Brawlers, you've already got a Divine. You've got a few things that are oriented to help deal with it. And it's not so much healing that you think you need, something like an Ankh to stop it, similar to like an Afro or a Hell. But it is enough healing that you have to pay attention to it, and so I'm going to keep my eyes on the Warriors and how they deal with just the small amounts of, I think, resurgence that the Bolts are going to be able to illustrate later on in the game.
Early Brawler's Beat Stick for Cuvo Fred helps out with a little bit of that healing that you're mentioning. Olympus Bolts regroup themselves for what could be the first Gold Fury of the game.
Yeah.
A slight lead over towards the Bolts, literally almost exactly 1,000, but the experience a little bit more backbreaking, 2,500 for the Olympus Bolts. Again, in the grand scheme of SMITE, not that crazy, but in the grand scheme of leads so far in this game, a little bit heftier. 2 of them in mid, 1 in support. We're equal everywhere else. So Ven really the one in a power spot here, where Dardes goes the same build on the E-set. Venenu does the same on the Poseidon as well. Lasbra pulled in, but River's Rebuke is fantastic. Delays out this fight. The Oni Warriors won't be able to follow up on it to the skies from Haddock's, but will initiate around this Gold Fury. Both mid lane ultimates still ready to go. Could see both attempting to steal.
of like bees just getting thrown out there. A lot of damage. Good Riptide. Neil's just gone.
Yeah, that's great from Awesome Jake to pull Neil right back into the fight. Kraken is up and it is down. Nika low on health. Cuvo Fred stunned up by Haddix and immediately knocked to the earth. Vote uses the beads, rolls back and away, and the Olympus Bolts have found a couple of targets, hoping to chase down one more. Dardes won't get out of this one. Lasbra's on a killing spree, and the Bolts will take 3 plus the Fury.
I'm becoming a huge fan of this Horus solo, and not
Snipes?
for
Snipes! No, doesn't get it.
Okay, yeah, good. Gold Fear, that got eerily close, and I like Vote's presence of mind. Those, go back and watch a Season 2 Smite montage. Most ROM plays are just snipes, and most of them will be around objectives.
Yep.
But I'm loving and falling in love with this Horus solo.
Yeah, it's looked good, Goran. We'll be able to talk about it in just a moment.
Or will we?
Well, we surely will, because Vote is just going to get rip-tided to hell and back. Barracuda's going to deal the final bit of damage. And I fear for the Warriors. Yeah, right. I fear for the Warriors, though, that this game has just been taken over by the Bolts, because normally it's been back and forth through 15 minutes. This is now a hefty fight lead, plus a Gold Fury, plus a Tier 1 tower, plus another kill. And the sweeping golden experience leads that have suddenly come out of seemingly nowhere give the Bolts such a strong position throughout the rest of this game. It's going to take a miraculous turnaround now from the Oni Warriors to keep the Bolts at bay.
You know, thinking back on it, though, if I'm the Bolts, they don't have a great track record against like the Dragons as a team. Do they want to win? Because they're just going to make it to the finals against a team that has a much more convincing win-loss versus them.
Right.
So we'll see maybe, I guess, how that works
out. We did get Bolts Dragons a lot, didn't we?
And not only does it happen a lot, but almost always, not always, but almost always has gone the way of the Dragons.
Yep.
And that's what they're set up for right now. This is more of a conversation of how well can you play from behind if you're the Warriors. And what's going on Dardes?
Great River's Rebuke. Circle of Protection drops down, Kraken immediately on top of it. Heal into the Scarab's Blessing. That'll keep Dardes alive. But for how long? The knockup from Lasbra, fantastic. Dropkick from Nika. Might just trade out his life, but Haddix has the range anyway. Not something I thought I'd say about Horus. Another good Riptide from Jake, and my man is just feeling himself today. Every once in a while, a Yamoja just enters the flow state. And it seems like Awesome Jake will do no wrong.
I mean, and now you're set up so beautifully. No circle protection, no mid laner, no real fight potential here for the Warriors. Fire Giant should be a relatively easy scoop up, but you have to be worried about Cuvo. I think his dive potential could still kill off someone like Vinnerbera.
Yeah, the Mystic Rush away will seal the deal here. Vote brawling out with Lasbra. Fire Giant has been dropped, but just to complete the last couple of kills, Vote ends up dying over on right. And the Olympus Bolts will get the Fire Giant anyway, but with a couple of extra kills. Wins a Shamash over the wall. Again, could make things interesting. But in all likelihood, Nika realizes there is not much to be done here. The Olympus Bolts have roared back in game number 3. They will take the Fire Giant in a 7,500 gold lead, going around the 20-minute mark.
And now they just get to further that even more, right? You should be able to knock this. And now I actually love things like that because they're going to go a little deeper. And they're jumping onto him. He does get a leap away. No. But a blink forward with a stun, never mind, Haddix doesn't have it. And that's what I'm gonna use these few minutes. Hey, we're about to watch the Bolts do a stereotypical siege. They might even be able to get a right-hand Phoenix out of this one. But it is Haddix that I think has really opened my eyes. I don't think as a lane matchup, this Horus is crazy, but what it brings to the table for team fights, the blink stun, all the setup is just insane.
Wow, the Bolts have just not reset, and they're going for a Phoenix siege. Cuvo Fred is alone in the back. Cuvo Fred is stunned in the back. Overhead kick necessary. Haddix takes the Spirit Ball. Cuvo Fred jumped on and deleted by Lasbra and co. As the Olympus Bolts now have a 5 versus 4 advantage, make it 5 versus 3. Vote has turned around 1 with the snipes, but he is stunned by Haddix, rolls away, and the Horus strikes pay dirt yet again. Now the Olympus Bolts as 4.
You've got minions?
Looking at an end, it's only Numa and Nika. There's not a lot of damage to fight back against this. If Barracuda can simply connect onto the Titan, this game in this set will be over, but it is slow going. You have 15 seconds on Dardes. In a moment like this, you're hoping Nika goes big, but he's got to go back to the fountain. 50% on the Titan. Haddix has pulled the rest of the bullets right back in. Nika's got a little damage onto the front line, but Lasbra's got Neoma, and the Bolts got the Titan, make it a 3-0 over the Onis.
19-19 on the timer for them, and they finished that one. I think that's just good play.
Good movie.
I mean, from the beginning for the Bolts, right? They kick that one off with a lead. They continue with a lead. They win fights, and guess what? They kept the lead, kept going. I think that one was just well played, reminiscent of what those late-game team fights were, and they just break the back of the Warriors very early on. I think there's a couple of fights, and you could see it in the charts, where it's a little lead that gets pulled back slightly by the Warriors, but never does it feel as big of a difference maker than when Haddix rotates over. Some of those fights and the stuns that he provides, the setup he provided around the Gold Fury pit, that first big team fight was just massive.
Another showdown between the Jade Dragons and the Olympus Bolts at the end of phase number 1 here. Been a storied matchup.
Every time.
And we got another one here between the Bolts and the
destiny.
Dragons. Now that said, regardless of 3rd or 4th for the Oni Warriors, a fantastic first phase, and we'll see how they're able to do at Masters. The Oni Warriors will play the Titans tomorrow, so we have that to look forward to as well. First set tomorrow. And then the Titans versus the Jade Dragons to end the day tomorrow. To end the day today, we'll take a break, and then the desk will break this one down.
Be my only way, be my one away. You're my only way, be my heartbreak. Be my heartbreak, be my one away, be my only way. You're my only love, be my heartbreak, be my one away, be my only way. You're my only love. Message, hit me now, hope you get the message. Who are you texting? It's not me today, who are you texting? Hit me back, I hope you get the message. Calm you down cause you've been acting reckless. Flood the ring and I bust down the necklace. Doesn't mean a thing, just know I spend it. Doesn't change a thing, just know I spend it on you. Get you Louis if you want it, no that's nothing, no. You can tell me that it's something, but it's nothing, no. You ignore me, but you're always on that phone. Acting funny, but you tell me that you love me though. Yeah, you tell me that you love me though. Wanna believe it, but I feel it that it's something wrong. Babe, just tell me what's going on. Be my heartbreak, be my one away, be my only way. You're my only love, be my heartbreak, be my one away, be my only way. You're my only love. Message, hit me now, hope you get the message. Who are you texting? It's not me then, babe, who are you texting? Hit me back, I hope you get the message.
2, 1.
Welcome back to the SPL, powered by our friends over at Prime Gaming. If you already have a Prime membership, then you should be making the most with that Prime membership by getting yourself some Prime Gaming going on. You get all kinds of great content, all kinds of great games out there and available to you, plus a free monthly Twitch sub to your favorite streamer. As Mifflin will always say, just use it here. Why not? Why do you want to use it anywhere else? You're watching Smite, might as well sub over here to Smite to get some of the great stuff that we have for you. Or if you don't already have a Prime membership, you're missing out on a lot of great stuff. I mean, you get free shipping with all of your orders on anything. You can also watch movies. You can listen to music. You can read books. There's so many great things that you can do with a Prime membership and a Prime Gaming membership. So make sure that you are making the most out of that opportunity to do so here. Just like the Olympus Bolts have made the most out of their opportunity to find a 3-0 here in this best of 5 up against the Oni Warriors. Mifflin, what a fast game compared to what we've witnessed in games 1 and 2. The Olympus Bolts were done with going to these 35, 40-minute fiestas. They said, we want the win, we want it now, and they did so.
Yeah, this one almost feels like a little bit of draft diff. On top of play on field, of course, you got to give credit over to the Olympus Bolts, able to execute perfectly on their composition. But when you look at what the Oni Warriors are bringing, how do they close gap into that backline? I think the only counter matchup the Warriors had for themselves that reared its head once or twice is Ven would for some reason, drop a Kraken in the middle of a circle protection. Yeah, maybe wait it out next time. But outside of that, who's closing gap into the back line, and when they do so, who cares? Cubo Fred was able to get back towards Ven, but that guy is super quick, super fast, and he had an iron wall of defense built around him, named Haddix, named Lasbra, named Awesome Jake. It just felt like once the Bolts had grouped up as 5, their composition just far outscaled in the team fight, and I think it's hard to argue against it. How many times do we see this as well? Just walking away, dancing, all 4 arms, healing the entire team, getting you out of these sticky situations. Multiple times we saw the Olympus Bolts individual members drop to about 10% HP, and it just doesn't matter because 10% HP is 9 more than you need.
I mean, and not just that. I mean, the amount of multi-man sweeps we've been seeing coming out of these Shivas, we saw it be a game changer for the Titans back in their previous set, and then we see a big one right there at the very end for Lasbra here on the Olympus Bolts. The Shiva pick, combine it with the Horus, combine it with the Emoji, just combine it across the board here. I mean, a 6-0 performance for Lasbra, 3-1 for Barracuda. Despite the early death that he had when 3 people had to gank him over into that lane, Barra was able to come back and turn himself around over into that duo lane. But, I mean, this is a complete 180 from what we were seeing in the previous 2 games, where these long, drawn-out engagements, these back-and-forth roller coasters. This time around, the Bolts just came to play, and they dominated.
Yeah, and I was maybe made a fool of here because I had predicted at least one more game out of this set. Was not ready for the Oni Warriors to go down in 3. I'm being told now by our Olympus Bolts representative that I am a fool and that I should have expected a 3-0 by nature of them being the Bolts. He's nodding at me aggressively. I don't even know what to say anymore, man. I wish he'd look somewhere else.
Something about this Horus too. I mean, Haddix brought this pick out a few weeks back, especially up against the against the Valkyries. Sometimes when you're ever going against some of the lower seeded teams, you got to play around with things a bit, but he's bringing this back in big sets here. You really do not want to look over here. We do have Haddix standing by. This is who he was talking about, the Olympus Bolts representative that's here for our post-game here. You're giving him the stare. You got the intimidation going on over here.
He was talking bad about us for a second. I don't know.
Oh, my God.
Losing a game?
Man, losing a game.
I don't think so.
Couldn't imagine. Couldn't be you over here, Haddix. Couldn't be the Bolts. You know, at the end of the interview with Jake, I asked him, do you have any words to say over to Neil Ma? And his words were, we're going to win because of the power of friendship. That was Jake's word. Do you think the power of friendship is what got you guys the win over here today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can definitely say that. I mean, once you have, years of synergy between everyone on the team and you're all great friends, you work together well. I mean, that's really all it comes down to this fight. It's just synergy.
Yeah, I mean, synergy worked out for you guys. I mean, finding a 3-0, fairly impressive. I mean, 2 long, drawn-out battles there in game number 1 and game number 2 as well. I mean, when you have those moments in those kinds of games where you're going back and forth, you get a win in one team fight, and now you're losing your next team fight. I mean, how do you guys bounce back and forth with that kind of mental?
Oh, I mean, once you play it long enough and you're, like I said, you're good with everyone on the team, we're always confident in playing these super late games, and if we lose, we're always confident in playing the next team fight.
Well, you will have another matchup tomorrow. That's going to be up against the Jade Dragons. Any expectations for them before I let you go?
Ooh, I mean, it'll be probably a close set. We're usually pretty competitive with them, but I'm expecting we still win.
There we go. A historic moment again tomorrow between these two teams. Congratulations on your win, Alex. Let's get back with the team to celebrate. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Yes.
Say it. No?
Scram.
Oh,
God.
He was scared to say it.
He put the mic back on.
He put it back on. He pointed at you, too. He might come over here and tell you to scram if you're not too careful there,
And
Mifflin.
I would, dude. He's the Giga Chad for a reason.
There is a reason that he was called Chaddix for the longest time coming up in here before the SPL. But let's take a look at the bracket and the schedule. That way you guys can see how everything breaks down for the small seeding tournament. It's only 4 teams. It's a very simple bracket to follow here compared to what we've had for some of our brackets up into the past. With a win by the Bolts and the Dragons, that means they play each other tomorrow in the finals. And with a loss for the Titans and the Warriors, well, that means that they play each other tomorrow into the finals. And then there's no extra matchup or anything between that. It's just these 2 sets. There'll be 2 best-of-5s. It'll be seeding for not just the Masters tournament taking place in a couple of weeks, but also for Phase 2. So Jade Dragons and Bolts will at least be your 1 and 2 seed going into Phase 2, and then 3 and 4 for your Titans and your Warriors, depending on how that match goes up as well.
Well, you gave Haddix the opportunity to speak his piece to the Jade Dragons. The Jade Dragons obviously did not know who they were going to play against, so we didn't get the opportunity to ask them. But I did sit down with Maxime, that's Panda Cat, for just a moment to see what he thought about the set that was currently being played, Oni Warriors up against the Olympus Bolts. And he said that it's crazy that 2 teams were willing to come out and compete for 2nd place. That was his verbiage.
Wow. A little bit of back and forth there then between Haddix and Panda Cat. Maybe we'll see some early rotations from Haddix to try and put that one down up here.
It's a long ways.
But that is a long distance. But the horse is able to travel some of that. Maybe a teleport there as well. So we'll see how that one goes out tomorrow. We'll have 2 best-of-5s kicking off once again 11 a.m. here on the twitch.tv/SMITE game. Make sure that you're tuning in on behalf of myself, Mifflin, and all the casters production behind the scenes. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see y'all tomorrow.
Scram.